Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend WTFW back with another fiction. What if Deku living as vigilante Batman and a devoted father? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Droplets hit the wool tatami, soaking into the carpet. The patter isn't as dense as rainfall, nor is it quite as heavy. However, it does seep through the material as wet as liquid can possibly be. Blood is the devil's ink. Clay can create too. The combination of both can be molded into anything. Kai Chisaki, young head of the Yakuza, is capable of morphing and reshaping too. With his touch-based quirk, all it takes is 5 fingers coming into contact with something to perform a complete overhaul, which is why his subordinates find it odd that he isn't wearing his gloves to prevent accidental deconstruction. They know better than to question their superior though. They wouldn't dare go against their boss, so they keep quiet about it. They just go about their business, taking their seats at the table they were called to. Joy Irinaka, general manager of the Shai Hasekai, counts wads of bills. A stack of yen begins to pile up behind him. Hari Kirono, being Chisaki's assistant, brews tea to deliver. It's so quiet in the room occupied by the entire force of the Yakuza that it's eerie. Even Rappa and Katsukame, as large as he is, remain silent. Mamoto and Satsuno share a look, communicating telepathically even without the usage of quirks. Then again, anyone in the room would be able to know what the other person is thinking in this atmosphere. The brewer beeps to alert Kirono it's ready to be poured. The sound is not just to inform them that the tea is ready. It's an indicator that the meeting can finally begin. However, before it can, there comes a disruption. The old-fashioned shoji Japanese sliding door that makes up the room's entrance and exit is pushed open. Nobody had been expecting anyone else to attend the meeting. Least of all, a second Kai Chisaki. All eyes flick towards one or the other, discomfiture and consternation brewing faster than the tea did. The Chisaki in the doorway glares at his doppelganger with menacious golden eyes. They each share the same wardrobe, green bomber jackets with purple fur collars. Despite the beak-shaped masks covering their jaws, the facial features are so similar that they could be mistaken for twin brothers. The only notable difference is that the one in the doorway does have his white surgical gloves on, whereas the one at the head of the table does not. The imposter becomes evident then. The Yakuza turn on who had duped them, though he's not the real Kai Chisaki. His fingers are just as deadly. The 5 digits become elongated, jutting out and spearing Yu Hojo before he can crystallize. The deceptive identity thief is well informed of the Yakuza group's members. Fraudulent Chisaki's informant had been rather thorough about each of their quirks in particular, and here I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. Fake Chisaki retracts his 5 fingers from Hojo. Now a lifeless corpse, the Yakuza's body falls to the floor. The gangster's killer stands up, stealing their face next. Chisaki's brown hair retreats into his head as his facial structure is reconstructed. Even his clothes change completely, leaving no trace of former identity. Bastard! Katsukame roars in anger as he rears his colossal fist. Right behind him, the rest of the Yakuza are as equally infuriated. The intruder didn't just steal Hojo's appearance. Diamonds cover his body, taking the impact head-on. The sturdy makeshift armor is just enough to shelter him as he's sent crashing through a wall. The diamond chips, cracks, and then shatters as he tumbles across the floor. How dare you use the boss's face? Irinaka lets loose a shrill shriek while pursuing the infiltrator. He doesn't expect Hojo's body snatcher to transform their arm into an axe, ready for the assault. In one swift swing, fake Hojo chops Irinaka in half. Intestines unravel and blood spills just like that. The real Chisaki has had enough. He himself rushes in, intent on touching the interloper in order to disassemble their shape-shifting body. As always, when he does make contact, the body bursts. Blood sprays in all directions, flesh completely liquefied. As much as he hates the sight of blood, he can't help but grin beneath his mouthpiece. However, that toothy smile doesn't last. The red liquid changes its shade of color, graying and turning thicker. It collapses in heavy heaps instead of being a wet splash. It oozes worse than gore. It makes his skin crawl and causes hives to break out across his face. The deconstruction of clay doesn't matter when the putty is able to be reshaped. Fake Hojo drips all over the carpet, clay face melting with the rest of his body like a wax figure in heat. A gurgling sound is the only warning the Yakuza gets before the intruder stretches his arm again, long appendage serving as a thick whip. Despite being made of clay, it packs a heavy hit. Satsuno and Nemoto are slammed into the ceiling, bones crumbling from the force of impact. Katsukame charges the clay figure with another massive fist cocked back. When his knuckles connect, the liquid splatters just like when Chisaki's quirk took effect. But that doesn't finish the fight. The clay chute spikes up from its many puddles, piercing the hulking Yakuza member from all angles. Katsukame unleashes a primal scream while trying to retreat from the spires spearing his body. What are you? Chisaki mutters under his breath as he watches the unkillable slime slam into Rappa next. Rappa's punches have no effect on the liquid, every blow absorbed by the clay. The fight is futile. Hirono hurries to stand by Chisaki's side. There's an urgency in his tone when he pleads, "You need to evacuate." While it's distracted, but they don't get the chance to escape, even if they wanted to try. A spike stabs through Hirono's chest, impaling him on the spot. When it retracts, there's a hole at his epicenter. Chisaki's assistant slumps to the ground, joining the other dead Yakuza there. Sakaki, who had opted for booze over tea, has his brains bashed in by a clay hammer. That same clay then forces its way down Tabe's throat, imploding the man from the inside out. Not even Tengai's shields are enough to hold back the force of the unkillable liquid. He's eventually buried by the weight of the clay closing around him and crushed. Chisaki grits his teeth, grinding them together behind his beak-shaped mask. His golden glare watches as the clay morphs until it matches his appearance. "What is it that you want?" He addresses himself with venom in his voice. "Transfer all of your assets to this offshore account." His living reflection sounds exactly like him, although his movements aren't mirrored. Fake Chisaki reaches into his coat pocket to pull out a cell phone, offering it to the real Chisaki. Real Chisaki taps numbers into the device, carefully avoiding touching it with all 5 of his fingers. After he's finished wiring money into the bank account, he hands it back. "Done," he growls before asking, "Anything else?" Fake Chisaki's eyes lift in delight, making an expression on the man's face that not even himself had ever seen him have before. Then, the imposter's hand takes the form of an axe again. It makes a clean cut, beheading the real Chisaki. The voice that comes out of the fake Chisaki is no longer masculine. A feminine cheerful response answers the dead man's question, "Nope." The still-living Chisaki changes his hair color without having to dye it, brown locks becoming blonde. His chest develops a modest bust and his manhood becomes womanly. Pretty soon, he puts a pep in his step that's much too bubbly for a gangster. He becomes the murderous girl, Himiko Toga, the ex-member of the League of Villains and former partner of Anarchy. She skips her way to the nearest wall, avoiding the bodies laying by her feet. "It feels good to be cute again," she thinks. A miniskirt and a cardigan is much cozier than a business suit and a heavy coat. Her now uncalloused hands touch one of the many corpses, smearing them in blood. She's only been doing as she was instructed, but she has to admit that it's been fun. And now she even gets to finger paint with blood. Her hands slap the wall, sliding up in a wide arc and curving down. At the bottom, she dots it with one final smack. Once she's finished, she sucks on each of her fingers. It's better than licking sauce off of them. Toga can't suppress the giggle that escapes her grin full of fangs as she saunters out of the room, leaving behind her a bloody question mark. Bats skitter as they return to their roosts in the upper reaches of the cave, carefully segregated from the more delicate electronics of their master's headquarters. Izuku Midoriya, as nocturnal as the creatures he shares company with in the underground lair, is stationed at the biggest of assorted machines. A massive screen displays more media outlets than the naked eye could skim. Surrounding the articles are various street cams, the live footage watching dark crevices and corners closely. The sole survivor of the Midoriya bloodline monitors the massive computer display intently, even when he's not prowling the streets or patrolling from the rooftops. He remains a watchful guardian. The Dark Knight works as endlessly as he does tirelessly to prevent another night like the one that took his parents from him from ever happening again. His matte black suit, cape, and cowl blend with the cave's atmosphere. The winged sigil emblazoned on his chest is the same as the winged creatures also dwelling in the dark. He is the legendary Batman. Behind him is a girl who had also been orphaned. She was held in captivity by the Yakuza until he had rescued her, and now he has taken her under his wing. Her silver flow of hair hangs over a German Shepherd and Great Dane mix, another stray that he had taken in. She runs her hands over the dog's coat of black fur, petting it gently. A silver tag hangs from the hound's dark blue collar, the name Ace engraved in the metal. Midoriya had never imagined he would have a pet, let alone an adoptive daughter. He never thought his crusade as Batman would allow him to have such attachments. Yet, Eri is the best ward he could have asked for, and Ace drooling while he sleeps isn't so bad either. Though Kurogiri would beg to differ, considering he's the one who mops the floor every time. Surrogate father, butler, caretaker, and accomplice to Midoriya, he too dwells in the cave at this time. The man made of purple mist is dressed in his own suit, albeit is much more fashionable than Kevlar armor. "It's nearly dawn, sir. Your winged namesakes are retiring for the day." Kurogiri glances about the cavernous space to watch bats swoop from stalactites despite directly addressing Midoriya. "Perhaps you should consider doing the same." Midoriya mimics Kurogiri, pointing the direction of his gaze elsewhere while addressing him. Later, there's still some work to be done. The vigilante taps at the keyboard in front of him to pull up additional news reports. As comical as it may be on Batman, he should really get a pair of reading glasses considering how much time he puts into researching documents. Kurogiri pauses, wanting to push the matter further, but yields in the end. He settles for a hum of disapproval to let Midoriya know his feelings. Then he directs his attention to Eri. "And what about you, little lady?" The young girl casts a look towards Midoriya, hair whipping with the sudden motion. When all she gets is his back instead of the support she was hoping for, she returns her gaze to Kurogiri. Knowing all too well what he meant, she whines indignantly, "Come on, can't I stay up just a little bit longer?" Kurogiri's yellow slants peer into Iri's bright red orbs. Her puppy eyes are stronger than the actual dog's or even Midoriya's when he was her age. He sighs, unable to say no to such a face. He does, however, know how to guilt Midoriya into doing his dirty work for him. "Of all the bad habits she could have picked up from you, I suppose insomnia isn't the worst." Kurogiri talks to the man's back but knows he hears every word. Finally, Midoriya swivels in his chair to face them. The faint glow from the computer screen casts a shadow over his face that just barely hides the bags under his eyes. There's stubble growing around his jaw, his chin in desperate need of a shave. He looks like a tired dad and he hasn't even done any of the parenting yet. There's a brief moment where both Kurogiri and Iri think he's going to defend her as well as himself. "Aren't you forgetting that tomorrow is a big day for you? You're going to need all the rest that you can get." But then he reminds the girl that she'll be taking the entrance exam for UA in the morning. Iri pouts, more frustrated that he backed Kurogiri up instead of her over having to go to bed, but surrenders to the logic. "Fine," Ace whines when she stops petting him to head for the elevator lift. Kurogiri takes over, scratching the mutt behind the ears. The dog's complaints cease. As Iri walks away, she shouts over her shoulder, "Don't forget to feed the bats." To which Midoriya raises a brow. "You feed the bats?" The bats prefer free-range corn-fed chicken goujons gently fried in extra virgin olive oil. Kurogiri recalls the dinner he has been cooking upstairs before adding as an afterthought, "with chives." Midoriya rolls his eyes at the man's antics before returning his attention to the supercomputer. Now that Iri is gone, he freely shares what it is that he's been invested in. The Shy Hasekai have been killed. The blunt announcement causes Kurogiri's usually slanted eyes to broaden a bit in surprise. The men who were holding Mistress Iri in captivity. He pats Ace on the head one last time before joining the vigilante at the computer station. Now that he's able to get a closer look at what's on the screen, he finds himself skimming through police reports and website articles. The entire Yakuza was brutally massacred. The present seems like the worst time to be making light-hearted jokes about the murder, but the butler can't help himself. "It seems someone has saved you the trouble of having to do it yourself." Knowing all too well what was under the bandages around Iri's arms and legs, and how long those scars took to heal, Midoriya doesn't disagree with that sentiment. Yet, he took a vow, and he has a mission that he must stay committed to. The mask hanging behind him with his cape is what he became to uphold that promise. "I'm going to investigate and find out who did it." The vigilante pulls it over his face while slowly rising from his seat. "I was afraid you were going to say that." Kurogiri ducks his head down in dismay. The dedication that Midoriya puts into his crusade far surpasses the amount of effort he puts into running his company. Numerous times has the caretaker received calls complaining that the young philanthropist fell asleep during business meetings. That's when Midoriya doesn't show up late or miss them entirely. Now donning his cowl as Batman, the caped crusader marches past Kurogiri with a vengeful aura. The white lenses where his eyes should be are narrowed more than Kurogiri's yellow slits. The horns atop the Dark Knight's head create a demonic visage that horrifies criminals. But the butler himself can't help but also feel something at the sight of the boy he raised becoming such a monstrosity. But in a city of monsters, that boy had no choice but to become one himself. Midoriya is convinced that it was a monster which took his parents from him. And it takes a monster to scare another monster. That's what Batman is meant to be. The night itself has become something to be feared by villains and criminals rather than something to revel in. It can't be helped that there was a ripple effect. Batman became feared by forces of good as well. Batman became something they didn't understand. And people always fear what they don't understand. Pro-heroes and police couldn't define the legend as merely a vigilante, nor a myth or an urban legend, because Batman is a very much real creature of nightmare. So when Batman arrives at the familiar stronghold that had once been the base of operations for the Yakuza, he has to sneak into the crime scene rather than strutting in. His nose picks up the scent of rust before he ducks under tape meant to close off the area. He recognizes the sickeningly dry yet sweet metallic waft of air as the smell of blood. As it dries and ages, blood takes on a vile pungence that smothers your senses and suffocates your breath. He almost reaches for the rebreather stored in one of the various compartments of his utility belt, but forces himself to endure it. As he steps over bodies covered with preservation tarps, he wishes he could have been the first to analyze the scene before forensics could contaminate the area. It'll be harder to uncover evidence since nothing went untouched and they likely already confiscated some of their findings. The yellow markers littering the floor tell him there are things missing. Eventually, he finds an occupied room. Not all police and pro-heroes are afraid of him. Two that he formed an alliance with are currently talking with a few other law enforcement members. The commissioner himself, Naomasa Tsukachi, and the #1 hero Lemillion had agreed to work with him. Batman stands between the doorway and where the hallway bends, out of sight from everyone except for the commissioner if he looks at the tiny sliver where the door is cracked. When Tsukachi notices the vigilante shrouded in shadows, his rectangular eyes widen behind the frames of his glasses. The graying mustache on the commissioner's upper lip curls before he waves for the other officers in the room to clear out. Can you give me and Lemillion a moment of privacy? Mirio Tagata, the symbol of hope as All Might's successor, gives Tsukachi a questioning glance. He hasn't been made aware of Batman's presence yet. Not until the room is cleared out by the cops that were also oblivious does the vigilante step into the light. Tagata's face twists behind his visor, shocked to see the fellow caped crusader. Hey, Bats. Lemillion suddenly understands why Tsukachi had the room cleared out. Tagata holds out a hand for Batman to shake, beaming a smile that All Might would have been proud of. The #1 hero had become a lot friendlier since the night he and the commissioner contacted Batman by a signal in the sky. Midoriya believes the reason why is that he's trying to mend their initial introduction in order to move forward with a better relationship. Though he can't be certain, he's not the trusting type. Batman brushes by Tagata, cape closed around his body, ignoring the outstretched hand. To Lemillion, it seems cold. The pro-hero might think the vigilante holds a grudge. For Batman, it's just a precaution in the presence of such a powerful being. The bat-themed vigilante steps into the zone a little further, inspecting the blood spillage with a thoughtful stare. The Yakuza was full of formidable members. For them all to be eliminated and dispatched in such a grotesque way, it poses a lot of questions. The first that comes to mind is, who could have done this? Tsukachi huffs, like he's holding back a laugh. His expression looks anything other than amused. That's what I was going to ask you. The commissioner pushes up the glasses that are sliding down his nose before asking, what do you make of this mess? Not having investigated the murder scene for himself yet, Batman doesn't answer. The dark detective instead kneels down to inspect the blood-soaked carpet. It squelches under the pressure of his gloved finger poking the still dampened fabric. Lemillion opens his mouth to say something, but nothing comes out. Nervously, he rubs the nape of his neck with his own gloved hand. After watching the vigilante search the scene a while longer, he works up the courage to try again. He worriedly glances about while asking Tsukachi, should we be letting him touch stuff? The commissioner shrugs, not sharing the pro-hero's concern. Batman seems competent enough that he won't contaminate anything, which is more than can be said about official heroes. He'll do no more harm than if you were to touch anything. Taking mild offense, Tagata pivots to shoot Tsukachi a look of exasperation. I didn't. Lemillion holds his hands up to show that they're clean as though that's all the proof he needs. Batman suddenly interjects, Himiko Toga. They each whirl back around to face the vigilante, sharing similar expressions of confusion. Tagata tilts his head. Tsukachi raises his eyebrows. What? The vigilante is still knelt down, his back facing the two members of law enforcement. Blood isn't the only liquid that the dark detective has discovered. Beneath the carpet is something much thicker. It's what had a squelching reaction when he had touched it. Batman swabs a sample of gray goop that he distinctly remembers analyzing before. She recently went missing from her cell, did she not? He also recalls capturing the crazed blonde when apprehending Anarchy. As he scoops the hoary liquid into a vial to take back to his personal crime lab, he thinks about her escape from prison shortly after. Yeah, she did. Tsukachi, on the other hand, would rather not have any recollection of the deranged woman. Against his better wishes, he dares to ask, why? You got something. Batman finishes collecting the evidence he discovered, sliding the miniature test tube into one of his various belt pouches. It was just a drop, but it's a lead. He ponders over her potential involvement, racking his brain to figure out the mystery of her presence. Maybe. Lemillion folds his arms over one another across his chest, covering the golden number there. His wide forearms are pure muscle. His presence is powerful as he too mulls things over. You can't possibly think a villain of her caliber could have done all this, do you? But his confidence in his own abilities can be his own downfall if it blinds him of the potential in others he perceives as below him. Batman ignores Tagata, glancing over his shoulder to address Tsukachi instead. Have forensics check for traces of solvent, resin, and mastics in the DNA of the victims. The vigilante has a hunch that involves Toga's quirk residue. The way the bodies are dismembered and the amount of blood stains splattering the walls like paint has him looking for a pattern. Tsukachi turns around, facing away from the vigilante. He understands that Batman is asking for permission without doing so verbally, and he also knows full well what for. Do what you have to. I didn't see anything. He talks to the wall instead of the man behind him. Appreciating the gesture, I'll let you know if there's any other substances you should be looking out for. Batman cooperates by agreeing to share his findings later. But in order to do that, he first needs to take a blood sample from one of the bodies, head whipping from left to right, between the commissioner and the vigilante finger pricking a corpse. Tagata tries not to whine too loudly. He throws his hands up in the air, uncrossing his arms to shout, hey, guys, I'm still here. Don't leave me out of the loop. The childish display should have put a smile on the commissioner's face, but his expression becomes something much grimmer than before instead. I'm not. I was just saving the best for last. His tone says otherwise by the sheer sense of dread that lingers on every one of his words. Even Batman redirects his attention to Tsukachi when he hears the sound of the man's voice, turning to address the vigilante. If you're all done here. He starts to venture outside the room. Follow me. Batman casts one last glance at the body he's taken a sample from. He notes that out of all the severed corpses, this one is only missing a foot. Then he follows Lemillion and Tsukuachi through a hole in the wall. The sheetrock is shredded and debris is littered everywhere. It was broken by some sort of blunt impact, he judges. But what really catches his eye is what's written in blood on the wall that's still intact. A riddle. I'm something with 5 digits, but I am not a hand. When you walk along the beach, I leave prints in the sand. What could I be? Batman's eyes narrow behind his whitened lenses as he reads the message. He had been given a riddle before, a secret case given to him by Tsukachi and Tagada, and this could very well be the same perpetrator. The answer is a foot. The missing limb of the corpse he had examined is still fresh in his mind, and he doesn't think that's a coincidence. He turns around, glancing back at the lifeless body. He hadn't bothered checking it for ID, but the tech in his mask lens ought to do that for him. He soon identifies the older man as the former boss of the Yakuza before Chisaki came into power, the original head of crime, before crime was outclassed by villainy. Crime is afoot, watching Batman closely from the corner of his eye. Commissioner Tsukachi asks the Caped Crusader, still think this thing was orchestrated by Toga. The bats sleep with folded wings. Cocoons of silken darkness hang from the stalactites that occasionally drip feces into the cavern below. It's their home above the abyss, always staring down from their world turned upside down. Suddenly, the mammals are disturbed in their dwelling by the roar of an engine. The metallic machine is sleek but larger than life compared to them. It's a vehicle unlike any other, drifting into the cave as though it belongs. Some of the bats abandon their perches, but others welcome it with shrill shrieks. When the car comes to a stop and the cockpit opens, Batman climbs out. His boots thud against the floor, sound echoing throughout the space. Each footfall follows suit. Bats creep steadily along, following him from above in the shadows. Eventually, he reaches another massive machine of advanced technology. The supercomputer he had been using before going to the crime scene awaits him. He slides the tube containing the sample that he collected at the crime scene out from a pouch on his utility belt. The forensics equipment he has wired into the computer begins analyzing the gray goop, searching for compounds that match with the ones in its database. As hypothesized by the dark detective, the slime contains the same substances as the sample he collected from Himiko Toga's quirk during the Anarchy case. However, there are other chemical compounds blended in that weren't there before. Batman pulls back the top of his cowl, unmasking himself so that he can peer closer at the monitor's readout. He hums to himself as he compares the chemical concoction with an outdated drug that had been long presumed retired. There had once been a legal variant, used to prevent balding and erectile dysfunction, though it had been stopped being sold as pharmaceuticals when it was updated. Previously a booster for quirks, dubbed Trigger, it got an advanced version called Idio Trigger. The shortcoming of that variant had been losing control of one's senses, as well as the usual problem of the drug, that it eventually would wear off. However, it looks like this new version has been formatted to evolve a person's quirk and become part of the DNA rather than improve or cure in small doses. Midoriya moves from the keyboard to the green envelope containing the first riddle he had received, the riddle of the Sphinx. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 3 legs in the evening, and no legs at night? The generic answer is a human going through the cycle of life from baby to senior. But perhaps there's more to it than that. Midoriya recalls the bloody message Toga had left him at the Yakuza's base. I'm something with 5 digits, but I am not a hand. When you walk along the beach, I leave prints in the sand. What could I be? The former Yakuza leader's foot being removed must mean something. 2 riddles to do with standing. Midoriya moves back to the keyboard, tapping to pull up bank records. The Yakuza had their assets transferred to an offshore account before vanishing from the server completely. Financial standing. Midoriya rubs a thumb against his chin as he contemplates the burglary. Whoever orchestrated Toga's breakout and removed the side effects of Trigger is too smart for such a small-scale crime. That can't be all the riddles mean. Midoriya becomes lost in thought as he contemplates the meaning of it all. The clues with hidden meanings have to lead him somewhere. They must have some significance. He doesn't believe it's just a wild goose chase meant to mislead him. Whoever is behind all of this truly believes themselves intellectually superior, that they're confident enough to taunt him, that cockiness will be their downfall. He's sure of it. If he can just figure out what it all means. Midoriya raises his head, drawn back to the numbers on the screen. Numbers. He grabs the letter that had been given to him by Commissioner Tsukachi, reading it again. 4 legs, 2 legs, 3 legs, no legs. The money that was transferred was done in increments. 4 grand, 2 grand, 3 grand, nothing left. The vigilante's cape trails behind him as he rushes to grab a pen and paper. The second riddle had a number 2. 5 digits. He counts on his hand, getting the 5 numbers in sequence, but then remembers the second riddle's answer was his foot and not his hand. The Yakuza leader's foot was missing. That must mean the 5 was subtracted. Midoriya racks his brain for more numbers to fill the sequence and finish the equation. Under the lead of Chisaki Kai was the 8 precepts. Subtract 5. 3 legs in the evening. They must have been killed in the evening. The time 5 or 6. Midoriya is willing to bet the number 5. He circles the number for emphasis. There's also trigger, the pharmaceutical version, idio, and now this variant. 3 legs. That can't be a coincidence. Midoriya tries various formulas with the numbers he's given, searching for a hidden code. Just when he starts to feel like he's gone too far as a conspiracy theorist, he finds a few groupings that could pass as address lines. Not wanting to kick down the door of someone innocent, he begins cross-referencing the locations, one of which is a beach house. When you walk along the beach, I leave prints in the sand. A little more research to see who owns the residence all but confirms it. Hugh domain is nothing but fabricated records, a false identity, and a cheeky one at that. A podiatrician is their profession. Their name is an alias for human. They exist solely as an answer to the riddles. The caped crusader pulls his mask back over his face, just as hastily as he had driven into the cave. His advanced engineered vehicle speeds out. Takoba Municipal Beach is one giant trash heap. The garbage washed in from the sea had accumulated for years and turned it into a junkyard. It makes for a revolting place that most would steer clear from going near. It also makes having a residence there all the more private. When Batman arrives at the destination, he almost misses the severed foot placed at the doormat. His eyes narrow. He doesn't have to bend down to get a better look or take a DNA sample to know it belongs to the former Yakuza boss. Knowing that he's at the right place, he pushes open the sliding glass door, only slightly shocked to find it unlocked. As for the house inside, it's empty. Batman glances around, searching for something that's not there. Not even a picture or painting hangs on any of the walls. No furniture decorates the corridors. It's a completely devoid space. He ventures deeper with another step forward. The floorboard creaks under his heavy boots. Batman pauses. He leans back from where he originally stepped. No squeak. One step forward, though, and the wood chirps. He's walking on a nightingale floor, usually used to detect intruders in temples and palaces. Certain floorboards are purposefully crafted to make sound. Only someone familiar with the layout would know where to avoid stepping. But in this particular instance, there's nobody living in the beach house. The floor must serve a different purpose. Batman glances back at the foot left by the entrance. He rereads the riddles once more in his mind. The answers, a foot and the number sequence he was given. 4, 2, 3. He stepped on the second board. Then, the third and fourth must also be rigged. Batman tentatively tests his theory, proving it true when the wood creaks. The placement is so close together that he figures something must be hidden there. Batman slides his gloved fingers into the crevices and pulls. The boards come loose easily, popping out. As suspected, the dark detective discovers a hole beneath the surface, a ladder leading down into the pit. The vigilante activates his night vision before descending into the tunnel. He climbs down one rung at a time, carefully going at a slow pace. He's not sure what to expect at the bottom, but it's certainly not something as quaint as the miniature hideout that he drops into. The underground base is more decorated than the ground level. Newspaper clippings of himself and other vigilantes or heroes adorn the walls. A coffee table at the center has a still steaming cup of tea on it, a question mark sculpted with foam. But what stands out the most is the computer array mounted in the corner. Various monitors glow green, running various versions of code and algorithms that would be difficult to solve for even the best of programmers or hackers. But at the epicenter, one of the screens awaits input. "Are you there?" A typed text flashes in the middle. Batman looks down at the keyboard below him. He taps the buttons to reply yes. When the system shuts down, he worries that he may have been too hasty, but it just as quickly reboots. The monitors flicker back to life, but illuminating a different pixelated picture. The screens collected combine like a puzzle and formulate a mirror reflection of the vigilante. Then, a set of speakers pop as they switch on next. A delighted giggle echoes before it's followed by an equally thrilled voice. "You've made it. Oh, I'm so glad. I was worried I may have made it too difficult for you." The chipper tone is soft-spoken, feminine maybe. Midoriya worries that they could even be a young child like Izumiya's anarchy. Then again, their voice could be affected by their quirk. Anything is plausible as a cause for the squeaky impishness. Batman discreetly twists a small knob on his utility belt, activating a device that'll record the room's sound to play back as audio later. Any lead is better than none. To get them talking more, he tries a direct approach by asking, "Who are you?" The disembodied voice shows a hint of amusement in its response. "Oh, come now, detective. I'm sure there are much better questions you have for me." Batman glowers at the speakers as though the mysterious enigma is hiding within them. Then again, he wasn't actually expecting an answer to that question. Instead, the vigilante tries asking, "What are you planning?" The speaker pops when the voice gets louder, the enigma likely having gotten closer to their mic. You'll see. There's a pause before they regain their earlier cheerfulness. But first, let's play another game. Recalling the massacre of the Yakuza and Toga's breakout, the vigilante feels his stomach sink. If their idea of fun is anything like the Psycho Blondes, then he must put a stop to it. This isn't a game. Batman stares at the image of himself made up of culminated computer screens. If it is, I'm winning. The carefree voice is unfazed. Batman then sees why. The screens switch to a different picture. An underground hero that he recognizes is bound and gagged to a chair in a strange contraption around their waist. The voice loses its bubbly attitude, changing into something much more ominous, and Mindjack isn't. Mindjack, the successor of Eraserhead, doesn't even look conscious. Where is he? Batman steps closer to the set of monitors in the hopes that it'll be intimidating somehow. He hadn't been expecting a hostage. The voice chuckles, yet again unaffected by the caped crusader's presence or words. This really is all just a game to them. I'll give you a hint. Their voice reverberates a little. The shy Hasekai's stronghold and here have something in common. Batman inhales a little too sharply as he suddenly remembers who he's dealing with. The Riddler is all about mind games and deception. His riddles and puzzles have answers hidden with answers. He can't lower his guard for a second by losing control of his emotions. He has to stay focused and always thinking. The dark detective recalls the Yakuza's lair when he had infiltrated it to rescue her. It too had an unassuming upper level with the true base beneath it. There had been a secret wall. Batman spins around, confronting the only wall that remained barren. He rushes over to it, rapping on the sturdy structure with his knuckles. The dull knock he gets in return has him prying the barrier back. There on the other side is a thick sheet of glass in between him and the underground hero who had been captured. When he rears back his fist to break through it, the voice pitches back in, "I would advise against that." Batman stops, cautioning himself against the warning. When the Riddler sees the vigilante awaiting further instruction, they continue. First, a riddle, Batman. Batman refrains from turning around and facing the computer screens as he listens. What's worse than biting into an apple and finding a worm? The speaker asks its question. It's an old one, like the riddle of the Sphinx. Batman says the generic answer aloud as he ponders whether that'll be the same one that the Riddler is expecting. Biting into an apple and finding half a worm. The vigilante eyes the contraption around Mindjack's waist. Strings thin enough to be invisible are connected to the glass barrier. He puts two and two together. If he shatters the shield, then the underground hero will be chopped in half. Batman keeps his fist clenched, but lowers it to be at his side. He tries to stay calm and collected as he asks, "What does Mindjack have to do with this?" "Nothing of significance," the voice says dismissively. "He's an underground hero, so he snooped into matters to do with the shy Hasekai and stumbled upon a few of my puzzles. As you can see, he's nowhere near as equal a fair opponent as you." Batman ignores the Riddler's answer, not believing it for a second. He figures he can get the true story out of the underground once he's rescued. "What do I have to do to save him?" The vigilante returns his attention to the device rigged around Mindjack. But yet again, Riddler gives an unusual response. Nothing. Batman spins around. He hears it before he sees it. A countdown. The ticking of a bomb. Numbers flash across the monitors, lowering from 15 to 14. It's only a matter of seconds before he runs out of time. It suddenly clicks in his head what the glass barrier is for and why the underground hero will be safer if he does nothing. The glass must be blast resistant to the incoming explosion. Batman himself, however, has no such protection. The vigilante hurries to the ladder in order to escape. He knows it'll take too long to go hand over hand, so he fires his grappling hook instead. The pulley hoists him up and through the opening to the underground lair. But still, that's not fast enough. Before Batman can make it out the sliding door, the blast reaches him. His fire retardant cape takes the brunt of the explosion, protecting the vigilante from being burned too badly. But he's still thrown off balance by the force of the detonation. As the building collapses around him, he's knocked through a wall and out a window. Glass rains down on him with flickering flames and he tumbles across the sand of the beach before crashing into a pile of scrap. Midoriya coughs and clutches his side where a chunk of metal pierced his body armor. It's going to be hard to walk off that rough tumbling. But he remembers experiencing much worse when fighting Deathstroke. Still, there's sure to be a good set of new bruises in the morning. When he pushes off with his leg to stand up, he realizes just how bad a condition he's going to be in. What part of his vision isn't blurred gets obscured by colored spots. Midoriya hesitates before removing his mask. Then, he takes off a glove. He needs to feel and check for a concussion. He'll need immediate medical attention before he even makes it back to the cave. And hospitals are out of the question. That doesn't leave very many options considering who's closest to him in terms of location. He sighs before reaching into his utility belt to pull out a burner phone. The plan is to discard the rest of his suit and make up some excuse for how he got so badly injured, since Melissa Shield doesn't know about his nightly activities, and he'd like to keep it that way, even if he has no choice but to go to her for help. Midoriya is more accustomed to Kurogiri silently stitching his scars and wrapping his wounds, spare for a few snarky remarks. The reprimanding and questions were always reserved for after his bed rest, so despite her considerably valid justification for confused concern, Melissa Shield's insistent inquiries as to how he got so injured start making his head throb more than his concussion. When she dabs a disinfectant-soaked cotton ball against the sore spot, the stinging doesn't help either. He seethes through his teeth, regretting the decision to come to her for aid, even if it meant permanent brain damage. Again, he avoids giving her an actual answer. He vaguely gestures to himself, stating the obvious. I'm in bad condition and you were close by. He internally hopes that she doesn't ask him why he insisted on her lack of medical expertise over a hospital other than that, but knows better than to do that much wishful thinking. They'd already done the same song and danced such a number of times that he'd lost count. Every time, she scoffs and incredulously asks the usual rhetorical question, so you came here just because you had no other choice. Her frown deepens into a scowl, nose scrunching under her glasses that do very little to contain her glare. Finally fed up with the runaround Midoriya has been giving her since he showed up at her door covered in wounds, she asks a new question out of anger, to die or for help, nearly just as annoyed and straining to keep himself composed while in pain. Midoriya meets her gaze with a hard stare of his own. Shield bristles at his intense expression, but he just as quickly schools it and looks away apologetically. That doesn't keep the pettiness out of his tone when he responds, though. Either one would have been fine. Shield slightly reels at that response, almost as though she were struck. It clearly wasn't the answer she was expecting. Her eyes fall on the blood-stained towels covering her couch, which she had laid out before drifting back up to the stitched cuts from which that blood flowed. Shield's strong stare starts to soften as she returns to the same old question. Izuku, how did this happen to you? Her tone lost the edge it once had. She sounds as tired as Midoriya looks. Midoriya sighs before turning his attention back to her. The barrier he usually puts up between himself and others appears lowered to the bespectacled blonde. His green gaze holds some sort of sincerity as he chokes out, "Nothing happened to me. This wasn't some unfortunate side effect. This was a choice, a vow." He hadn't expected her to understand. Not even Kurogiri does, knowing his history and the context behind those words. Yet, it still hurts him when she shakes her head in confusion. Just once, he wishes someone would understand and stop asking questions he has no other answer to. What the hell are you talking about? Shield moves her hands from finishing his bandages to holding his. She's reaching out to him. She wants to understand, but Midoriya pulls away. He would rather lie to her than potentially get let down. He had planned to reserve his cover story for when he's right-minded but gives in to Shield's persistence. A gang of some kind mugged me. The woman sitting across from him barely contains a gasp, but he continues with the fabricated tale before she can poke any holes in it. They recognized me and thought I was carrying a fortune just because of my status. As for the deeply embedded injuries inflicted upon him over the years, he has a reason for those as well. I know you lived on an island your whole life, but in the real world, people who are quirkless make for easy targets. He hadn't meant to take a verbal jab at her, but he sees that it landed by the way she flinches. Even so, he doesn't stop just yet. If I had a normal childhood, I'm sure these type of beatings would have made me into a regular punching bag. Even if your body can handle that much abuse, it shouldn't have to. Shield shakes her head while keeping her eyes set on him. She's sure that there's a story for every crevice in his skin. She's certain that those are also accountable as the reasons why he runs his company. You think you have to hurt so others don't have to, but that just isn't true. The way he avoids making eye contact tells her that she's right. Like I said, this is a choice. His voice is so faint that it's barely a whisper. Midoriya moves slowly, meeting her gaze again, this time with a different kind of intensity. I'd rather it be me than you. There's more hurt in his eyes than his body's tremors. They've gone past the physical scars now. Memories are more traumatic, or in Midoriya's case, the lack thereof. He's aware of the absence Shield's parents had in her life too. Her mother never present on the island where she grew up, and her father arrested in her teenage years. It's not the same as watching your parents gunned down in front of you, but he feels some sort of kinship with her. Quirklessness isn't all that they have in common. They stare deeply into one another's eyes, seeing something more meaningful to each of them. Midoriya reaches over, the blonde blushing, and he removes her glasses so that he can look at the hue of her iris more clearly. In that moment, it's just the two of them. Each other is all that they can see. They're drawn towards one another, leaning closer, so close that their lips nearly meet. Suddenly, the burner phone that Midoriya had used to call Shield starts to ring. The sudden interruption startles both of them, causing each to pull away. Shield avoids re-establishing eye contact while Midoriya answers the phone, since it's a secure line, and only one used for his vigilante activities. Midoriya already knows who's calling without needing any caller ID. Kurogiri. Now's not the best time. His immediate answer after flicking the cell phone opens makes Shield blush even harder. Hardly is it ever. Midoriya's caretaker snarks from the other end of the line. Pardon my concern when I saw no readout from your suit. It's not like you to go out at this time of night without it. Kurogiri's worry then slips through the tone of his voice as he explains the reason for his call. Midoriya glances at Shield from the corner of his eye, relieved that he's the only one who can hear his butler. To her, their conversation is one-sided. It's not on me right now. Thanks for checking in, but I'm fine. He tries to keep his answer vague enough that Shield won't decipher the meaning of his response while still conveying the essential information needed to pacify Kurogiri. Being more than acquainted with working under the employ of people living double lives, Kurogiri understands without more needing to be said. Very well. He drops the topic before moving on to ask, should I be putting Mistress Iri to bed myself then? He's asking if Midoriya will be keeping late hours. Iri must be staying up, waiting for him to return. No. Midoriya glances over at Shield before answering, I'll be home shortly. Kurogiri lets out a breath of relief that's audible over the phone. He's supportive of the young girl's adoption and hopes for them to bond better. She'll be delighted to hear that. As hard as it is for Midoriya to manage his dual lives while simultaneously acting as a surrogate father, he can't help but share his own surrogate father's sentiment. Without so much as a goodbye, he flicks the phone closed and hangs up. It might seem rude to most, but Kurogiri understands there's not much more that would have been said anyways. Plus, it helps Midoriya to save the time he'll be needing to get back home as promised. Shield puts her glasses back on, clearing her throat. You should spend the rest of the night here. She starts collecting the towels covering the couch in an attempt to tidy the place up a bit, but Midoriya has already made the committed promise to head home. He stands up, shaking his head. That wouldn't be appropriate for co-workers, would it? Shield goes back to blushing, nearly dropping the towels that she collected. That's not what I meant. Her glasses slide down the bridge of her nose as she looks away in embarrassment. Midoriya hides his smile by sliding a shirt over his head. He knows full well that she only made the suggestion out of concern for his health, but he couldn't resist a flirtatious joke. Sorry, but I can't. He keeps up the attitude with a wink. Maybe next time though. To those unaccustomed with his true self, this is just his typical behavior. The playboy philanthropist act is something he must keep up from time to time to avoid suspicion. It also helps him to redirect Shield's attention from questioning him about his injuries again or the phone call. And it works. Shield is much too flustered to form a response, let alone think straight. Midoriya uses the opportunity to slip away without being further interrogated, only making time to briefly thank her for patching him up. He's sure that he hasn't gotten away with it completely, but at least he's able to prolong providing her with any more false answers. When he returns to the cave, he leaves his suit in the car for Kurogiri to fish out. He hadn't left his laundry strewn around since he was a child, but he's in a bit of a rush tonight. Midoriya had been taught not to keep a girl waiting, and Iri is a very special one. He buttons up a long-sleeved shirt on his way to her room, wanting to conceal his injuries and bandages. That includes hiding the patch on his head by pushing down his bangs. Midoriya lightly knocks on her door before entering. When he does, he's relieved to see she didn't fall asleep waiting for him. She's still awake, book in hand to occupy her mind. He offhandedly wonders if the shy Hasekai had allowed her to read when she was in captivity. She certainly took a liking to the Manor's private library that it wouldn't hurt to assume. Kurogiri said you wanted to see me before bed. He broaches the territory with hesitance. He's still not figured out how to act around her. Having not had a childhood of his own, growing up much sooner than most kids doesn't give him any understanding of the youth, let alone how to be a proper parent to an adoptive daughter, though that doesn't stop him from trying as best as he can. Iri slides a Battle Fist-themed bookmark into the pages of her novel before closing it. Once she sets it aside, her bright red eyes redirect themselves to her green-haired guardian. He didn't tell you why, did he? That same bushy-haired father figure is taken aback by the pout that the young girl gives him. Shaking his head, no. Midoriya voices his confusion. Iri's mouth suddenly shifts to a giddy grin, surprising the self-proclaimed detective even further. Just as the vigilante on his off hours starts rethinking the capability of his deductive abilities, he realizes what day it is. Iri tosses her covers and blankets off, jumping from the bed into his arms. I did it. I got in. She squeals with delight while squeezing his waist with her tiny arms. Midoriya returns her hug, matching her enthusiasm with an equally thrilled smile. With all that happened tonight, he had nearly forgotten Iri's entrance exam to UA had taken place during the same day. I knew you would. I'm so proud of you. He recalls the mild training regime that he and Kurogiri had given her in preparation for the test and truly means those words based on how she performed. After being rescued from captivity, Iri had wanted to pursue heroics and save others like herself. It doesn't take a parent to know she had to do so the legal way. While Batman may not be the best leading example for her, That's the whole point. The Dark Knight is there so no kid has to be like him ever again. Adopting Yuri was for that same reason. Midoriya wanted to make sure she wouldn't share the same fate he had. She deserves better, and he hopes that she can get that brighter future at UA. But as he holds her close and thinks of the prestigious hero school, he also finds himself thinking of its principal, a mastermind with a questionably sinister side, who enjoys tea. The dark detective can't help but be slightly suspicious that there's no such thing as coincidence. It's a hunch, possibly a reach as a suspect, but he can't rule it out. Midoriya is relieved that Eri can't see his smile slip by still clinging onto him as he says, "I was hoping to have a chat with the school's principal anyway." The elevator ride is so smooth that its single passenger becomes lost in thought, without any notion that he's descending at all. Izuku Midoriya, owner of the company building, leans against the cubicle's back wall with one hand in a pocket and the other holding an envelope. Ordinarily, the boss wouldn't be carrying or delivering his own request form. However, what's enclosed is much too sensitive a matter to be passed off to a careless secretary. Midoriya is only willing to entrust Mei Hatsum with what's written inside, the woman he's heading down to the lower levels of Midoriya Enterprises to meet with. As he waits, his mind wanders and thinks of the inventor under his employ. Without knowing it, she had created a vast margin of the gadgets and equipment he uses as Batman. He had considered sharing his secret with her, since the two had gotten relatively close, but decided against it. She's so consumed with her work that the reveal would probably go over her head anyways. Still, he can't help but be grateful for all the aid she's provided. She's a hard worker that he doesn't want to take for granted. As a matter of fact, Hatsum has her own personal development studio separate from the others, upon request. It's a basement reinforced with a white metallic alloy, save for the black soot and ashes from explosions. But that's exactly the reason why the floor is crafted out of the special material. There, she can make inventions all day and night to her heart's content. When Midoriya arrives on the floor and steps off the elevator, he expects to find her still welding away at something. What he finds instead is another woman who has been on his mind as equally often. Melissa Shield, wearing a blazer and pencil skirt, surveys the development studio with a clipboard in her hand. Melissa, the surprise of seeing her where he doesn't expect to slips through his mouth. The blonde turns to face him, as equally shocked to be encountering one another again so soon. "What are you doing here?" Midoriya asks, forgetting that she works alongside him for his company now. Running a maintenance check. Shield shows him the clipboard by turning it over so he can read the manuscript. It's mandatory. She pauses and then asks him back, "What are you doing here?" Realizing that he's holding an envelope in his hand and that the blonde is eyeing it, Midoriya weighs it a bit like it's an option to acknowledge or not. "I just came to drop something off," he replies a little too vaguely, though purposely. When Shield raises a brow, he shrugs in an attempt to avoid suspicion. The first lie that comes to mind is the excuse that he runs with. "It was getting a little stuffy in my office and I like to check up on my employees." Unbeknown to the quirkless woman, the real reason that Midoriya stopped by Hatsum's studio was for a personal request. After taking damage from the Riddler's bomb trap, and then its wearer reflecting on all the times it didn't hold up in combat against opponents like Deathstroke, it was determined that the armor which Batman wears requires an upgrade. Specifications, modifications, and requirements are listed in the letter that he wrote for the inventor. For that reason, it's for Hatsum's eyes only. Midoriya is much too paranoid that somebody else would be able to put two and two together if they get their hands on the envelope instead. Shield tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear, playing coy as she teases, "You never check up on me." Had Midoriya not adopted a playboy personality and charm, he would have been reduced to a blushing and stammering mess. Fortunately, he's had years to grow up and mature. The only one blushing is the blonde herself. Midoriya fixes her with a teasing glance, but replies with a completely deadpan tone, "We saw each other just last night." Shield matches the half-joking and half-stoic energy with her response, "You were bleeding all over my couch," which gets Midoriya to huff, just barely on the brink of an actual laugh. Shield's eyes widen behind her glasses. It's a rarity to see him genuinely amused. Her blush deepens, further allured by his natural charm more than the facade he puts on. "I'll make it up to you one of these times," Midoriya half-heartedly promises. Not wanting the vow to become an empty promise, Shield attempts to seize the opportunity by asking, "How about tonight?" Midoriya startles, doing a double take. Shield elaborates on the suggestion, hoping to convince him while he's caught off guard. "Would you like to come over? This time for dinner?" I wish I could, but..." Midoriya stammers as he processes the request and mulls over his plans for the night. Even if his mission as Batman weren't in the way, he has other arrangements. Midoriya remembers his appointment with Yuri's principal. "I've got a meeting elsewhere after this and I'm not sure how long it'll run." Shield lowers her head in disappointment, averting her gaze from Midoriya and to the clipboard in her hands. Midoriya, seeing her downtrodden demeanor and sulking expression, feels a tug at his heart. So, hoping to make it up to her, he returns to the half-hearted promise and makes it full. I'll take you up on that offer some other time though, if it's ever still on the table. He gives her a sincere smile to let her know he means it. Hearing him, Shield glances up from her clipboard. When she sees his smile, she becomes flustered. Oh, of course. Diverting her gaze once more, she tries hiding her blush with the clipboard. I don't mind waiting. Relieved that she's no longer upset and willing to give him a chance, Midoriya lets out a small sigh. Thanks for being patient with me. I know I'm a hard sell. He internally wonders if she'd still be smitten if she knew just how true that statement was. Shield laughs, taking the comment as a joke. Ew, no way. The blonde shakes her head as she sizes him up and down with her eyes. She doesn't need glasses to see that he's handsome and physically well-defined. Other women seem to think so too. I know, right? Look at these beefy arms. Hatsune materializes out of seemingly nowhere to grab Midoriya's biceps, giving them a firm squeeze. The inventor gawps. Whoa, did they get beefier? Her salmon-pink dreadlocks sway with the motion of her circling him as she exclaims, Hunka hunka. Seeing how taken aback Shield is, Midoriya stops Hatsune in her tracks by whacking her on the head with the envelope in his hand. No sucking up to the boss. He takes a step back so that she'll stop groping his muscles, just for extra measure. Undeterred by his response, the hyperactive grease monkey pauses only to lock onto the envelope, her quirk zooming in on it. What's this? Hatsune snatches the letter from Midoriya before ripping it open and asking, a new project. A private project. Keep it under wraps. You know the drill. Midoriya shoots a quick glance in Shield's direction that he hopes only Hatsune will notice. Sure. The inventor extraordinaire waves the request off before making her own with that same hand outstretching to be given something. Bring me my tools. Rather than oblige, he brushes off her demand in return. Midoriya glances down at the open palm before heading for the exit. I'm going to that meeting now. But my tools. Hatsune calls after him with a pleading tone. When the pinkette turns towards Shield, the blonde follows after Midoriya. Mind if I join you for the ride up at least? She walks alongside him just before reaching the elevator. Not at all. Midoriya presses the call button for them to leave. Seeing that neither of her visitors are going to be of any help, Hatsune huffs and crosses her arms. Fine, I'll get them myself. The inventor whines only a little before getting to work. With one meeting down, it's on to the next. Midoriya waits for Kirigiri to chauffeur, prepared to meet UAS principal. Formerly a graduate from Seai Academy, Seiko Intelli had replaced her predecessor on the school board. Her intellect had made her a perfect candidate closely comparable to UAS first principal. That intelligence is also what makes her a suspect in the Riddler case. Intelli's quirk, IQ, is essentially that her brain capacity increases when drinking tea. Considering the Riddler's lair had a cup of tea present, it's not too far of a reach to suspect her. There's also the Riddler's voice. It was high enough a pitch to be feminine and Intelli is female. The detective in Midoriya can't help but want to follow the potential lead to wherever it may go. He also figures that even if Intelli winds up being a false lead, at least he'll have had a meeting with Iri's principal. For the little girl's sake, he hopes that Intelli is innocent. Then again, the sooner he catches whoever the Riddler is, the more lives he'll be able to save. With Himiko Toga involved, the risk factor is very high. He can't imagine the danger level she's reached with her recent quirk evolution. When Midoriya finally arrives at UA, he's more on guard than ever. Only actually being on the campus does he fully realize the extremity of the situation if it turns out to be true. A villain would have infiltrated Japan's most prestigious hero school. He can't imagine why, if not other than to run it into the ground and damage hero society. The status quo and position would allow her access to areas no other villain would be able to step foot at without breaking and entering. Unless, of course, that villain could morph or shapeshift into somebody else like Toga can. Two extremely dangerous psychopaths with power in more ways than one. He feels pressed for time to stop them more than ever. As soon as the large pair of French doors swing open, he's greeted by the principal in her office. Ah, Mr. Midoriya, I've been expecting you. Please, have a seat and relax. She gestures to the chair across from her before asking, would you like a cup of tea? Midoriya glances at the tea, already suspecting it of being drugged or laced with poison. No, thank you. He denies the offer before also doubting the chair. He remembers the contraption that Mindjack had been strapped to. And I think I'd rather stand. I won't be taking too much of your time anyways. Besides, he figures he can inspect the room better without being confined to a seat. Intelli purses her lips as she watches him examine her trophy case. Oh, but isn't there much to discuss about your adoptive daughter? Hearing the mention of Iri has Midoriya glancing back in her direction. If she is who he suspects, the instinct to protect the little girl isn't misplaced. What about her? He tries to be subtle about the clenching of his fists at his sides, but wouldn't be surprised if the principal notices. Intelli tilts her head, seemingly mulling over Midoriya's reaction as much as her own response. It's my job to read up on my prospective students. Iri is quite the remarkable young lady. The principal shuffles a few papers on her desk that must be related to her. Still protective of the girl that he's taken in, Midoriya turns to face Intelli. Shouldn't her studies be left to her teachers? He presses the issue just a bit to see her reaction. Intelli doesn't waver. She simply shrugs before answering. Well, yes, but then there would be no need for a principal if I didn't do my own part. Midoriya's eyes narrow in suspicion. She's dancing around the subject and not giving any clear answers. He's not sure if it's paranoia, but he doesn't want to take any chances when it's Eri involved. And what exactly is your part? His eyes land on a chessboard that also occupies the desk. He remembers the Riddler calling their crimes a game, which may very well make everyone pieces on the board. Midoriya stares at the pawns lined up on either side. What do you make of your students? That gets Intelli to frown just a smidge. She tries to school her expression, hiding it behind a cup of tea as she takes a sip. Once she sets the cup down, she wears a fake smile. You know, I also research parents. Her eyes meet Midoriya's, quirkless and orphaned. Do you resent UA, Mr. Midoriya? Or perhaps heroes in general? It's Midoriya's turn to frown. She's trying to hit a nerve. An eye for an eye. All that she's doing is further increasing his suspicions of her being the Riddler. This isn't about me. This meeting is about you. Intelli hums before asking. Not about your adoptive daughter. Midoriya tenses when she then stands up and continues. Mr. Midoriya, you're well aware of Eri's history, are you not? And what's become of the shy Hasekai? He wasn't expecting her to be so direct. Bringing up the Yakuza only confirms it. He's about to retort when the dual doors behind him swing open. A familiar face enters the room, one that he hadn't been expecting. Izuku Midoriya. Naomasa Tsukachi addresses Midoriya directly as he strides further forward. Commissioner. Midoriya turns to face the head of the police department. He sees that Tsukachi is carrying a set of handcuffs with him. Perhaps Mindjack or somebody else figured out the Riddler's identity too. He thinks, but then Tsukachi is roughly grabbing Midoriya and spinning him around. Please put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspicion of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The cuffs latch around Midoriya's wrists as he's taken into custody. What? Midoriya tries looking over his shoulder to see Tsukachi and get some kind of explanation, but his gaze is drawn away when he hears Intelli giggling. Intelli smirks as she steps around her desk. Did you really think you would keep your secret from me, Mr. Midoriya? Her eyes glimmer as they meet his and his widen. The possibility that she thought ahead and figured out his identity starts to register. Intelli then moves the White Queen in front of the Black Knight, claiming checkmate. The room that Izuku Midoriya currently occupies is as plain as his appearance, consisting only of Spartan furniture and a recorder the same way Midoriya's green hair may mildly stand out. Each chair is chained on either side of a table that's bolted to the floor, but Midoriya hasn't so much as squirmed in his seat to be quite as shackled down. The absence of a two-way mirror or a video camera in any of the room's four corners doesn't make the ensuing interaction any less of an interrogation though. A steel door pushes open, Commissioner Naomasa Tsukachi coming into the small space. He doesn't enter the room alone. Behind him is Sansa Tamakawa, recently appointed lieutenant at the precinct. Tamakawa carries a small old-school television box set and Tsukachi holds a handful of manila folders, until each policeman places their stuff on the table. Midoriya raises an eyebrow, but doesn't say anything. There's handcuffs still bound to his wrists. And nobody has yet to explain the reason for his arrest, but he still remains cooperatively quiet. The lieutenant with the head of a ginger tabby cat glances in Midoriya's direction before leaving the room and closing the steel door behind himself. Now just Tsukachi and Midoriya. The commissioner sits down across from the detained. He takes a moment to flip open one of the folders on the table, looking inside for himself, and then presses a button on the recorder. Mr. Midoriya, do you know why you're here? Tsukachi closes the folder and looks up to address the man across from him. His rectangular eyes are set in a hard stare behind the frame of his glasses. Despite having racked his brain about it for the past few hours, Midoriya genuinely doesn't. Or, at least, he hopes he doesn't know. The thought had crossed his mind that a connection was made between him and his acts of vigilantism as Batman. But even so, he and the commissioner are on relatively good relations that he wouldn't expect to be arrested if that were the case. So he shakes his head and answers honestly, no. Could you please explain what's going on, Commissioner? Tsukachi's lie-detecting quirk lets him know that Midoriya is telling the truth, so he obliges. The television that Tamakawa carried in gets turned on so that it can play a tape. In considerably good quality and clear-colored picture, the screen shows what looks like Izuku Midoriya shaking hands with Kajero Okuda at the Iceberg Lounge. Formerly Jurin and now known as Penguin, it seems as though he is in the company of a criminal. Already, Midoriya is putting together the puzzle pieces to what he's seeing and why he was taken into custody instead of Intelli. The person he's seeing on the television must be Himiko Toga posing as him. It's quite possible that with the aid of Trigger and her quirk evolution, she no longer needs a person's DNA to match their appearance. Toga had good relations with Penguin during the time at the League of Villains when he was Jurin, so it must have been easy to set up a meeting and frame him as Izuku Midoriya. We haven't been able to get a hold of your flightless feathered friend, but that sure does look like you speaking with him. Sukachi pauses the video but keeps the television on as he applies more pressure to his accusation. Your reputation as it is doesn't make it all that surprising you'd be hanging out in a nightclub, but you certainly chose the wrong one. The accused waves a cuffed hand in denial. I've never shared company with that man. Not as Izuku Midoriya anyways, he thinks. As a businessman, or anything else for that matter, I will never associate myself with or make dealings with people of that stature. The fabricated footage says otherwise, but Midoriya knows he has a chance of getting his name cleared so long as Tsukachi's quirk registers his words as truth. The commissioner does hesitate, but only momentarily. Tsukachi opens the folder in front of him and slides a set of papers across the table for Midoriya to read. That's not what your company's records say. The documents date back to when his father was alive. Midoriya takes them in his hand, peering closer at the details. Asashi Midoriya had worked with some shady people in the past. Not to mention one of the few he hired is still under your employ. Tsukachi studies Midoriya as intently as Midoriya studies the pages that he's holding. Could the apple have not fallen far from the tree? What are, who? Midoriya falters as he reads the name of his caretaker. Kurogiri had been associated with some less than legal characters, and so had his father apparently. The paper trail and the reason for his wealth suddenly starts to make sense. The reason why his father had left for America was to flee the country of Japan and stay out of their legal jurisdiction, not just because of a business opportunity. Witnessing the distraught range of emotions in Midoriya's facial expressions, Tsukachi starts to reconsider his initial judgment. You didn't know, did you? He comes to his own realization as he watches Midoriya slouch in his seat. No, I didn't. Midoriya mumbles a weak whisper. Internally, he's falling apart. He starts to question what his life mission is all about. He had dedicated himself to being Batman for the sake of his family, and now he's finding out that they were involved in the very same crime he swore to fight. The paper in his hand crumples as his grip tightens on it. I'm sorry. Tsukachi leans back in his chair as he gauges Midoriya's sincerity. Becoming just as despondent, he replies with his own share of sympathy. I didn't realize that this would all come as a shock to you. Midoriya stares at the papers that he's holding, still not quite believing what he's read over and over. Eventually, he raises his head to shift his gaze from them to Tsukachi and asks, how did you find all of this out? When you enrolled Eri at UA, Intelli uncovered some rather unsavory details pertaining to both Eri and yourself. Tsukachi adjusts his glasses as he recomposes himself. He's reminded of the case at hand and puts aside any condolences for the time being. Reminded of the pro-hero and principal, he realizes that she truly was only doing her job. He clears her of suspicion, also realizing how suspicious he must have seemed to her as well. She was only looking out for Eri. It starts to make sense to him now that he knows she was the one to gather research on the Yakuza investigation coupled with Eri's adoption. Tsukachi can practically see the gears and cogs spinning in Midoriya's mind over the revelation. After discovering it was actually his own family and guardian who were the bad guys, the commissioner deems it necessary to remind Midoriya that not everyone is corrupted by the system, Mr. Midoriya. Midoriya's eyes focus on Tsukachi as he takes those words in. Swallowing and then smiling the faintest of smiles, he nods. No, not everyone. Midoriya agrees. Realizing that Midoriya is staring at him, Tsukachi clears his throat and breaks the eye contact. Even though I'd like to say this has all been resolved, there's still a few concerns that I'd like to go over with you. He pauses before regaining his composure a second time. As a matter of fact, you may have presented me with more questions than answers now. Somebody's posing as me. Midoriya starts with the most prominent one. He gestures with his head towards the television monitor where his doppelganger and Penguin are on screen. He can't exactly come out and accuse Toga since he as Izuku wouldn't know of her, but he can at least put Tsukachi on the right warpath. Registering the explanation as truth, Tsukachi hums. Whether Midoriya merely believes that wholeheartedly or actually knows for certain he's been set up, he doesn't know. So he asks any reason as to why. Midoriya sits up straight and shrugs as he considers the possibilities of motive. Aside from my family's fortune or my reputation, I think I'll need to take extra precautionary measures so that nobody can walk into my company building wearing my face and then back out with any of the equipment we're developing. Tsukachi nods as he mulls over the countless possibilities. Yes, I guess though a concern, we can consider that pure coincidence with our other revelations. He puts the matter aside since it doesn't correlate or connect with the other issues, and moves on to the next. And what about Kurogiri? At that one, Midoriya falters. Reminded of the betrayal and secrets, his posture hunches. He practically raised me. Midoriya reflects on what very little of a childhood that he had and how he owes it to his surrogate father. Kurogiri had taught him how to shave, how to cook and clean, even how to defend himself and fight. There was never any indication that he would be. What did he do? Midoriya can't keep the subjectivity out of his voice. Tsukachi watches Midoriya closely from behind the frames of his glasses. Nothing without enough evidence for us to have brought him in with you. He can see how much of an internal battle the man is having over the matter. You're taking this rather hard, I imagine. Can you leave him to me? Maybe I can get a confession or… Midoriya jumps at the chance that Kurogiri could be innocent. Or maybe it's all a big misunderstanding. That has to be it. But there's also a side to him that waits in the shadows. A side that knows the truth and has already accepted it. A side that seems familiar to the commissioner, but can't be placed. I don't think this is something we can easily allow to fall under the radar. Tsukachi suddenly wishes he had a hot mug of coffee for this conversation to go down a little easier. But I can be tolerant of the fact that you're willing to help detrimentally. He's not sure how to broach the situation otherwise, so he gives Midoriya an olive branch. Thank you. Midoriya takes what he can get and nods gratefully. He then gestures to the documents spilled out across the table in front of him. I'd also like a copy of these forms. I think it's only right that I return some of these funds to their rightful owners. Tsukachi blinks in surprise before nodding with mock appreciation. Your lawyers and whatnot should be able to handle the legal jargon for you, but that sounds like a good move. But Midoriya shakes his head, emphasizing it's not for PR. I'd give up every last dime if it meant setting things straight. Surprised again, Tsukachi is at a loss for words. After a moment, he smiles and gives a small bow as a sign of respect. You're a better person than I took you for, Mr. Midoriya. Midoriya's eyes widen when he realizes his reputation doesn't mesh well with his current lack of performance. The playboy philanthropist act may be falling apart. He scratches behind his ear while feigning a laugh. Well, having a daughter now makes it a little easier to move on from being a womanizer. It's a lame excuse, but it's one he can only hope the commissioner buys. Reminded of the young girl that Midoriya adopted, Tsukachi's smile falls away. Yes, that brings us to Eri. I have several questions about her. He's returned to his serious demeanor and leans forward to hear what the girl's guardian has to say. I meant what I said. I didn't have shading dealings with the Yakuza or any other criminal organization, ever. Midoriya matches the energy with his own serious state, which reassures the commissioner. I was just making sure. He lets out a sigh of relief that his quirk told him Midoriya was telling the truth with that statement, but that sigh quickly turns into one of exasperation. Well, it looks like I'm back to square one when it comes to who wiped them out. Midoriya raises a single brow at that. He can't help but want to laugh at the prospect of him taking out the entire Shy Hasekai. With his training and gadgets or not. I appreciate your confidence in the quirkless. He can't keep the amusement out of his tone. Coming to the same humorous conclusion, Tsukachi hides his embarrassment. Good point. Only worsening it when he does a double take and realizes what he said. I didn't mean to sound discriminatory. No offense taken. But Midoriya graciously waves it off. Getting back on topic, Tsukachi shifts in his seat to get comfortable. So, mind telling me how you came under the care of Eri then? He levels his gaze with Midoriya's. Immediately, Midoriya averts his eyes. Ooh, I'm not sure how much I'm able to disclose. He carefully considers what he wants to share since he's limited to lying due to the commissioner's quirk, and eventually settles on. It's actually a shared custody sort-of thing. A former licensed hero performed a rescue opus and then asked me to take her in. I guess she thought I'd make a good candidate because of my past. Registering all of that as the truth, Tsukachi nods along. He tilts his head and asks, I take it you're unable to share a name. Midoriya hesitates. He doesn't want to get Shirotoko into any trouble. Do I have to? He keeps avoiding eye contact and hopes that the commissioner won't push the issue. Turns out, he doesn't really have to. You said former licensed hero. Does that mean this person is operating as a vigilante now? Tsukachi begins drawing his own conclusions instead. I don't really know what the legal situation is, but maybe. Midoriya shrugs as he tries to keep his answer as vague as possible. Considering her past and quirklessness, the response isn't exactly a lie. Not to mention her relative retirement. Fair enough. I won't pry. Tsukachi sighs in surrender before relaxing in his chair. Well, Mr. Midoriya, it seems Eri is in good care and your story checks out despite a few hang-ups. You're clear of any charges and free to go. Standing up to take his leave, Midoriya thanks the commissioner and wishes him a good night. Tamakawa opens the door and the exonerated goes home. Though, free to walk the world doesn't equate to being free of his own mind. He has a lot to think about after learning the truth of his father's fortune and Kurogiri's employment. If Kurogiri had known the whole time, he wonders about his mother. It sends him into a spiral. When he does return to the manor, he goes straight beyond it into the cave. There, he's able to conduct more research on himself and his family using the supercomputer built into the depths. He looks back through all the records Intel he found and relays them with what Tsukachi copied for him. Then he cross-references the documents with what only he is capable of accessing from his own company. It's laundered money. blood money, dirty cash. He considers following what must also be a paper trail but ultimately decides it can wait for later. There are much more pressing matters, such as the ever-elusive Enigma Riddler whose identity is still unknown. The only clue he's got now is what must have been Himiko Toga massacring as him in the Iceberg Lounge. It's a lead he'll have to follow and uncover more information on. The horn cowl and cape beckons him to go in like a bat out of hell. But he again decides to unravel the mystery a little more first. The face of Izuku Midoriya is needed for once. He throws on a black coat, pulling the hood over his head. Just as he's about to ride out on a motorcycle, Kurogiri enters the vehicle bay. He stops. Seeing the accused caretaker freezes him like a deer in headlights. Kurogiri is just short of being frantic as he asks, "Sir, where have you been? Your secretary called. Enri has been asking for you." Midoriya can only hear the concern in his butler's voice. He can't hear the supposed criminal that Tsukachi claimed Kurogiri to be. Realizing that his caretaker is still waiting on an answer, he fixes his head forward on the runway to leave. "Am I not allowed to have my secrets, Kurogiri?" It's a subtle jab at the lie he's been told his entire life that he eventually responds with, "I beg your pardon." Kurogiri doesn't understand in the slightest. A purple wisp of smoke that makes up his body tilts in a shape that inquiries an explanation. Unsure of what Eri told him or if Kurogiri is even aware of his being detained, Midoriya brushes it all off by saying, "Tell the board they'll be able to save whatever money they'll have left by removing my chair. The rest can go to funding a dorm at UA for Eri." Even more baffled, Kurogiri's yellow slants broaden in shock. "Sir, Izuku, I don't understand. Why are..." He's cut off by the sharp intake of a fuel-injected engine. The growl of the motorcycle overtakes his words. "Because there is no Izuku Midoriya, but not the bike's riders." "What are you saying?" Kurogiri starts to reach out to stop Midoriya from riding off but stops short when he sees the man's expression. "Izuku Midoriya is a mask I wear, that I've been wearing since I was a child, but it's become a liability, so it's over now." His face and tone is a lot like the night he made a vow to become Batman. He's devoted to a cause, to his mission, afraid of losing the boy he barely managed to keep alive after the shooting that night long ago, who may as well have also been shot. Kurogiri takes a step forward. You can't possibly mean that." But what he sees in front of him is shadowed by the hood being worn. The hooded figure of who that boy became looks away. "I do. Izuku Midoriya and his troubles aren't my concern anymore." His gaze fixed forward on the cave's mouth where bats fly out to roam the night. "Where does that leave us?" Kurogiri silently pleads for him not to go. "You have your job. Do it." But the man that the boy has become is cold and distant. Reminded of the boy's father and his other employer before then, Kurogiri begins to panic. He wanted to keep the boy from growing into something awful such as them. A side that Kurogiri had almost forgotten of himself, perhaps a past life, had intended to help the boy become a hero and not a villain. "No, us, you and me. If there is no Izuku Midoriya, then who did I care for? Who did I raise? Can you answer me that?" He keeps stepping closer and extends his arms for a hug. Before he can wrap his arms around the one he cared for, he's again stopped. "I'm leaving now." Whatever is left of Izuku Midoriya stays up in that manner, by the roar of the engine that leaves the cave. Raindrops fall to bequeath a blacktop street, ripples in the dark giving the surface an unsturdy appearance. Each footfall from the lone hooded figure occupying the stretch of road stays afloat anyways, grounded atop the blackened base. Those same rain droplets seemingly float, gentle to tap the being who strides in the night. In the glow of a burning street lamp, the specks are as invisible as he in the darkness. The living shadow stops at the Iceberg Lounge, only unveiling the hood to reveal himself when he's greeted at the door. Izuku Midoriya stares up at a reptilian man double his size and stature. He recognizes the nomified bouncer as Killer Croc, formerly a guard dog at the docks. He figures Penguin changed Agucha's position after he and Shire Toko brought him down the first time. The grotesque mutation has continued to develop since their last encounter, it seems. The desaturated purple hair he once had has all fallen out, or perhaps been shaved, replaced by a scaly skull. Parietal eyes glower at Midoriya from the greater height as Aguchi sniffs the air. Agucha's gaze fixates on Midoriya as he inhales, pointed teeth shaped into a snarl. "Your scent. It's familiar." Midoriya's own eyes widen as he realizes Killer Croc can recognize his scent. He's unsure of whether or not the nomified attack dog will be capable of putting two and two together that he's Batman. But he instantly adds to the list of his worries that Croc may also smell the fear he's excreting. "That's because I was here before." Midoriya acts quickly and decisively takes a gamble that Toga had crossed Croc's path while masquerading as him, continuing to put up a front with that excuse. He also tries to make their interaction as brief as possible. "I'm back for the same reason, to meet with your boss." But Midoriya's words fall on deaf ears. Aguchi is still sniffing the aroma that only he can identify specifically. "Smell, you smell like..." His mismatched mind works slowly to place the scent, but it's intent on solving the mystery. Feigning a laugh, Midoriya tries to play it off with a joke next. I thought the rain would help substitute for a shower, but I guess that was a mistake. His nervous chuckle doesn't do much to convince the imposing figure of Killer Croc, but it does distract him momentarily. The interaction is drawn out long enough for another door manager to step in. What's the hold up here? A man with spiky turquoise hair and a goatee pushes past Taguchi to have a look for himself. Well, recognizing Izuku Midoriya, his previously disgruntled demeanor shifts to something a little brighter. As I live and breathe, if it isn't Izuku Midoriya. He quickly shifts back to form in order to snap at his much larger associate though. Let him through, dumbass. A low growl comes from Croc, who it's directed at unclear. He does, however, step aside. Midoriya hurries past to get into the club, not wasting the opportunity. Now with the aid of neon lights, Midoriya recognizes the second door guard as Soga Kujisaki. In the world of vigilantes prior to his own time, Kujisaki had quite a record. Even for somebody involved in the underworld, he can't help but wonder how the man came into Penguin's employ. Don't mind him. He gets cranky if he doesn't eat often. Kujisaki flaps his hand over his shoulder to wave off Agucha's unspoken threat, though Midoriya takes it very seriously, considering Croc has a valid reason to make good on it should he come to identify his scent. Is it really a good idea to have a guy like that guarding the door? Midoriya makes an act of seeming anxious by glancing behind himself every now and then. Kujisaki shrugs, shoving his hands into the pockets of his pants. It keeps the riffraff out at least. He side-eyes Midoriya with a raised brow when adding, "Don't tell me you're a quirkist." Never. Midoriya quickly shoots down the suggestion. In reality, he used to be a quirk fanatic. Growing up quirkless, all I ever wanted was a quirk of my own. That desire had only increased exponentially after his parents died. He wishes he had a quirk to have saved them. Remembering the recent revelation of their criminal records though, maybe it's better off that he didn't. Midoriya surprises himself with that thought, a sharp pang to his heart as he immediately regrets thinking it. I can only imagine. Kujisaki considers Midoriya's childhood for a moment before sighing and opening up a little too. Well, quirks aren't all as great as they're cut out to be either. Take it from me. He takes the lead instead of walking side by side when taking Midoriya down a hall. I guess it wasn't easy for anyone growing up in our era. Midoriya mutters more to himself than to Kujisaki, though Kujisaki hears it anyways. He glances over his shoulder to reply, and I doubt it'll get any easier. Then they reach the door to an office. Welp, here we are. You and the boss seemed acquainted enough, so I'll leave you to it. It's the office of the Penguin. Midoriya watches Kujisaki walk away while giving a small bow. Thanks. He hesitates to knock on the door. Who is it? But it swings open on its own, an angry nightclub owner behind it. Though his scowl shifts to delight upon seeing his company, Mr. Midoriya. Don't be shy, come on in. Okuda waddles with his weight to a built-in minibar where he asks and offers, what brings you by? Care for a cigar? A drink, perhaps? No thanks, I'll pass on both. Midoriya waves them off before closing the door behind himself. I just wanted to make sure you're making good on our deal is all. He'd rather get straight to the point and keep the visit short. Mr. Midoriya, you wound me. Really, I'm hurt. Okuda makes a show of acting injured by placing his hand over his heart. It's the same hand Midoriya had broken when he paid Penguin a visit as Batman. I am a legitimate businessman. I always make good on my end of the bargain, especially when being paid as handsomely well as you're putting out. He chuckles to himself as though what he said is funny. You know I'm good for the money. Midoriya squints at Okuda as he waits patiently for information, though the glare isn't quite as effective without his mask. I don't expect your company to go under any time soon, that's for sure. Okuda continues cackling at his own joke. When he sees that Midoriya isn't laughing along, he simmers down and turns serious. Not to worry. I've got exactly what you want. I was gonna send it to the PO box you gave me, but since you're already here, Midoriya's intrigue provokes him to ask about the PO box mentioned. But he knows that it'd be too suspicious considering he's meant to be the same person Toga pretended to be. So instead, he subtly tries a different approach to extract other intel. And you've already been paid by my people, right? Okuda nods in affirmation. You have some reliable little workers. Yes, sir. I do believe we have conducted our business together rather well. Just making sure. Midoriya tries to keep any growl out of his voice, but he's finding it increasingly difficult in Okuda's company. Okuda withholds a USB he's brandished. That must be what Toga impersonated to gain. Though, there is one wee little hang-up that's bugging me. He uses it as a bargaining chip for whatever it is that he's referring to. Oh, and what's that? Midoriya restrains himself from sounding too surprised. He wasn't expecting there to be a catch or to come so close to acquiring what Toga and her accomplice wanted before they could get their hands on it. Well, you know I don't like to pry. There's no reason for me to go poking my beak into other people's business by asking questions. But there's something extra shady about what it is you're coming to me for. Okuda thumbs the USB as he looks it over for himself. His monocle is like a microscope being used to study it. How so? Midoriya takes a step closer as he's further drawn into the deal that his impersonator had with Penguin. Look, I don't mean any ill treatment. I'm just curious as to what a guy like you wants with UAS records. Midoriya involuntarily reacts in shock at that revelation. Already, he's reconnecting threads and ties to Intelli and UA as he considers various probabilities. Could it have to do with that little girl you took under your wing? But Okuda comes to his own conclusion based on Midoriya's reaction. Midoriya snaps out of his thoughts upon hearing Eri mentioned, glare hardening on Penguin. He doesn't bother keeping the gravelly growl out of his voice as he says, leave her out of your mouth. Okuda's mouth morphs into a toothy grin, the gap between his teeth showing through. Oh, touched a nerve there. But what sort of gentlemen are we if we can't keep our composure? He holds up his hands in mock surrender. The fingers that aren't missing twiddle innocently. What are you getting at? Midoriya keeps his razor-sharp focus on the slimy penguin in front of him. He's not fooled by the act, and he's even more on edge by the undertone of confidence from the corrupted businessman. The money you gave me is the Yakuza's. Yeah, I don't need to go making enemies who might consider it still theirs, if you understand where this is going. Okuda begins to elaborate as he works his way towards his computer monitor. There, he's able to show conversions and money transfers through the screen. Seeing that as a form of karma, Midoriya shrugs without care. You took the payment. There's no refunds for dirty transactions. It's not like he's the one who agreed to their terms in the first place, even if Okuda doesn't know that himself. That's what money laundering is for, to get it clean. Okuda snaps indignantly now that he's reached his tipping point. The end of the rope for his patience has been reached. Spit flying from his mouth as he squawks, the way I see it, you owe me now. I even hand-delivered your order for you. Now where's my tip? Midoriya turns away from the penguin that's furiously flapping his arms. I'm sure you get plenty of tips at the bar. You run a fine establishment. You'll be fine. He needs to shift the power dynamic back in his favor, and this is how he plans to do so. No need to be so stingy when you run such a fine business yourself. Okuda desperately tries to think of a way to blackmail the man prepared to walk out on him and regain control. Or are you planning to spend it all on that orphan girl's tuition? He lands on the reason he assumes Midoriya wants the thumb drive in the first place. Midoriya stops at the door, pausing there. I told you to not speak of her. His voice is a low growl, but it's loud enough for Okuda to hear it. Midoriya hadn't actually planned on leaving without the USB in the first place, but now he has more incentive to swindle the penguin. Well, that entirely depends on you. Okuda's smug smile returns now that he thinks he's regained control of the situation. He keeps utilizing what he views as Midoriya's weakness to try and renegotiate the conditions of their unspoken contract. You wouldn't want me to go telling her how naughty her new daddy is, would you? Midoriya reaches out with his hand, grabbing the latch on the door. He turns it, the lock clicking in place. He pulls his hood back over his head to conceal the expression that he's making. It isn't one that belongs to Izuku Midoriya. Even without his mask, it'll be evident to Penguin who it is he's actually conducting business with now. You're not going anywhere near her. Midoriya turns around to face Okuda, but his facial features are shrouded in the darkness that he's excreting through his aura. Sensing the extreme danger that he's in, Okuda nearly trips over his desk while backing away. Now wait just a bloody minute. He holds out a three-fingered hand in an attempt to hold Midoriya back. It's the same one that got broken the last time. It's now broken again. Okuda crows as loud as he can, a mixture of pain release and a call for help. Midoriya snatches away the USB that he came for before breaking into a sprint for the window. He knows before Killer Croc comes barreling through it that the front door wasn't an option. The reptilian Namu gives chase when the hooded thief leaps through the glass, both of them launching themselves into the wet world where predators play. Midoriya lands on a parked car, caving in its roof. He bounces off of it by his heels, moving with his continued momentum. When Aguchi lands on the same vehicle with his added weight, it's crushed entirely. The crocodilian beast roars before pursuing the runner. Midoriya avoids the crowded sidewalk and busy street, not wanting to put any of the pedestrians in danger when it comes to Croc's warpath for him. Instead, he darts for a dark alley. It twists and turns with various corners, the back exits of shady businesses on either wall's side. Graffiti screams profanity for him up to the point of reaching a dead end. While that would mean doom and damnation for anyone else cornered by Killer Croc, for a person who's trained to peak physical condition, he's able to meet the obstacle head-on. His sneakers scrape the brick walls as he bounds from one side to the next, carrying himself up the heights towards the roof ledges. Just as he's about to reach the top, his leg is grabbed by the massive monster below. Aguchi slams Midoriya into the ground with a single downward motion. The impact rattles Midoriya's bones and his back bounces against the pavement. Already, he's got all the wind knocked out of him, from exerting himself earlier and now this body abuse. He wheezes harshly to grab greedy intakes of air. The massive Croc reels his fist back, about to end it all as quickly as it started. But Midoriya rolls to the side in the nick of time to avoid being crushed. The ground shatters and cracks instead of his bones. but he feels the quake from the earth reach him just the same. The apex predator roars, rain splattering in a mix of saliva and rage that he missed. Midoriya scrambles to get to his feet, narrowly avoiding a secondary swipe of the beast's fist barreling towards him again. He tumbles backwards from a gust of wind pressure, crashing into a pile of collected trash. Loaded bags spill out of a few garbage cans, not enough to hold how much waste there is. Midoriya reaches for his waist, forgetting that there isn't a handy utility belt there to save him. He wishes he had just stealthily taken the drive from Penguin as Batman, thinking he could have avoided this fight or been prepared for the inevitable that way. However, in the moment, he also thinks innovatively to fight without his gadgets. He grabs one of the trash cans, swinging it at Aguch's head. It does nothing. The thin metal container folds against the thick hide. Killer Croc reacts violently, snapping at Midoriya with a vicious bite. The hoodie he's wearing gets caught, ripping as it's pulled in the opposite direction that Midoriya pulls. His green hair flaps wildly in the rain as he dodges to evade the monstrous opponent he's fighting. Aguchi lashes out, pointed fingertips nearly shredding more than Midoriya's jacket. He falls back, a flat palm stopping his descent before it becomes a full collapse. Then, Midoriya twists his body backwards and uses that same hand as a springboard to flip away from a secondary strike. It's not the rematch that he was hoping for, but Midoriya strikes a defensive stance like the last time he faced Killer Croc. It's one he's sure Aguchi will recognize, and will help to finally be able to place his scent, but he's left no choice. The massive monster towers over him, rain pouring off of his scales. Then it charges, jaw unhinged and ready to devour. Midoriya bends down, using Croc's size and strength against him. The maneuver he uses flips the opponent using their own power. Croc collides with a wall, bricks breaking and dust updrafting. Midoriya waves the smoke away from his eyes and holds his breath as he jumps back, not wanting to inhale any of it. With his vision obscured, he isn't able to see the hand that reaches for him until it's too late. It's the size of his chest, grabbing his entire body. Midoriya shouts as he feels an extreme pressure pushing his ribcage in. He was barely able to withstand a hit with his body armor on the last time. He knows he won't survive without it this time. Midoriya brings a knee up into Killer Croc's chin, not wanting to be another one of his victims. Then, he lands an elbow by swinging it downward atop Croc's head. The benefit of being so up close and personal with Aguch's face is that he's able to get a few good licks in. He aims for the nose first, then the mouth, knocking a few fangs loose. When all else fails, Midoriya goes for the eyes. He jams his thumbs into them, pressing hard. Aguchi bellows with affliction, tossing Midoriya across the alley in favor for his hand to rub at his aching eyes. Midoriya grunts a few times as he tumbles across the floor. The upside, though, is that he got free of Croc's grip. Not wanting to waste the very short time he has before the beast recovers, Midoriya forces himself to get back up. In between the two of them, there's a manhole cover. There's been stories about alligators in the sewers, but he doubts Aguchi would be able to fit in order to follow him. Midoriya takes the chance. He tosses the heavy lid off, in the direction of Aguchi. Croc bats it aside, vision recovering already. Aguchi reaches for him again, but he's already jumping into the open hole. Above him, Killer Croc roars with the thunder. Below the city drenched in rain is the flushing of its shit and piss within a storm drain. A drowning bat without its wings can't escape the rush of dirtied water. It's one of those nights, the kind that makes it difficult to fall asleep. Shadows creep like creatures that could also be hiding under the bed or in the closet. Floorboards creak as though they're being stepped on, noises occupying what should be an empty ambience. The paranoia of a boogerman keeps Melissa's shield wide awake. She tosses and she turns in bed, not daring to close her eyes now that they've adjusted to the dark enough for her to see. Well, as much as she can see without her glasses on. When Shield hears a thump louder than the other odd noises that her house makes, she reaches for those glasses to better enhance her vision. If she can't go asleep now, then she definitely won't be able to close her eyes unless self-assured that the sound doesn't belong to an actual person or monster. She throws her bed sheets off and climbs out of bed to investigate. Shield is as quiet as a mouse herself, taking light steps outside her bedroom. There, silhouetted by the moonlight gleaming through a window, stands a figure shaped like a person. Shield's heart skips a beat, her mouth opening to scream in alarm. Nobody ever actually expects to find someone or something as the source of nightly commotion. Yet this time, she's found the Nightwalker responsible for it all. Or, so she thinks, until the figure steps deeper into the room so the moonlight reveals their features. Hi, Izuku. Midoriya awkwardly waves with a wince when he sees her reaction. Though startled doesn't even begin to describe the way Shield is feeling, she does take notice of his disheveled appearance. His torn articles of clothing damp and clinging to him like his hair. He looks like a drowned rat. You look like shit. She tries not to sound too concerned but urgently ushers him to her couch. Either way, sit down. Are you alright? Still rather bashful, Midoriya rubs the back of his neck and takes a seat. Yeah, we really gotta stop meeting like this. His attempt at smoothing out the situation in the form of a joke is just as inelegant as his posture. but Shield plays along anyways. What kind of neighborhoods are you going to for this to happen twice? Hoping that it's some sort of comfort zone that'll allow him to cope with explaining his injuries or presence. It's a long story. Her hope falls short of itself when he pushes her away. I don't need you to patch me up this time. She gives him a once-over and fails to keep the skepticism out of her voice. I'd beg to differ. Then the smell hits her. She shakes her head to try and clear her sinuses. Are you here for a shower? You smell like shit too. Ignoring the remark, Midoriya digs into his pocket. He then pulls out a USB to present. I'm here for this. A thumb drive. Shield tilts her head curiously before taking the small device from him to see up close. Midoriya nods while requesting, can you take a look at what's on it for me? Still processing the random suddenness of his arrival in her home and what he's asking of her in his current state. All Shield can manage is, sure. She stands up to go and grab her laptop while asking, this couldn't wait until morning. You had to break into my house. Midoriya sinks into her couch as though the questions are heavy loaded and they're weighing him down. It couldn't wait. His voice takes a tone that tells her he's serious, but she still can't imagine a justification for his theatrical dramatics. And why me? She tries digging a little deeper for a better explanation while digging for her computer still. Midoriya closes his eyes as he takes the moment he needs to answer that question. He himself doesn't know whether it's due to rationalization or his emotions being compromised. He could say because her house was the closest again, or that he wanted an excuse to see her. He just can't explain his reasons for avoiding Kurogiri and his own home. So he settles on, because you're the only one who I can trust right now. Shield falters when she hears that. Her face starts to heat up, but she quickly stifles the feeling by swallowing it down. Okay then. She sets her laptop up and turns it on while prying for more. If you trust me so much, then why not tell me how you really got so battered up? Midoriya exhales through his nose, just short of being a mild form of amusement. When he gives his response, Shield is pretty sure that he does find it all humorous in some way. Same reason I smell like I wrestled an alligator in the sewers. Because I did. Fine, keep your secrets. She rolls her eyes while plugging the USB he gave her into her laptop's side socket. In a matter of seconds, she's given a prompt. It looks like this thumb drive has its fair share of secrets too. It's encrypted. What's the password? Shield sighs as she glances over her shoulder with the expectation of an actual answer to this question at the very least. But Midoriya sits up, looking back at her. Her expression matches his when he asks, it's lock protected? Wait, is this not yours? It's her turn to look and sound confused. If this entire ordeal weren't already strange enough, he's just gone and made it weirder. He waves off the question in favor of asking his own. Are you able to get in or not? I'm not sure. Shield frowns as she returns her attention to the prompt on her screen. When she clicks and reads all that it's giving her, she's even more baffled. There's a riddle for the password hint. Midoriya moves from her couch to looking over her shoulder so he can read it for himself. What perspective can still be seen the same when in reverse or looked at from others? Shield ever so slightly tilts her head as she mulls the riddle over and guesses. At an angle. No, it's more complicated than that. But Midoriya shoots the attempt at an answer down and tries working around the riddle. Can't you just bypass this? Shield shakes her head and crosses her arms, admitting momentary defeat, not without a supercomputer and a lot more time. Midoriya hums as he weighs his options. He does have a supercomputer, but potentially not a whole lot of time. He also wants to avoid running into Kurogiri for as long as he can prolong. He starts to ponder the riddle. He thinks that if the game master is Intelli, she must know about his identity. Perhaps, even if the enigma of an enemy isn't her, they may still know he and Batman are one and the same. Which means someone of their stature would tauntingly tease him. Thinking from the perspective of a bat, Midoriya twists the laptop so that it faces upside down. Hey, what are you? He ignores Shield's protests as he looks for any chance that his hunch is correct. Shield stops short, seeing the same clue that he finds. The code that had been running along the surface was flipped using letters instead of ones and zeros. However, that would only be decipherable from this path. Midoriya returns the laptop to its ordinary position and types into the answer key upside down. However, when he hits the enter button, access is still denied. Shield's face scrunches in disappointment as she says, looks like that wasn't it. Midoriya's eyes return to the letters that flutter along the screen. He watches them carefully, noting that they're the same ones and not the entirety of the American alphabet. Fortunately for him, he knows the English language well enough to put two and two together. He types in Umapapiston and hits the enter button a second time. The password gets accepted. When he sees Shield eyeing him inquisitively, he explains to her how he figured out the solution to the puzzle. You can spell the words upside down and in reverse with other letters of the alphabet. Different perspectives, but still the same. The elaboration has Shield scoffing in disbelief. Quite the password. She huffs to herself. The small pout is over not solving it herself, Midoriya imagines. Let's see what was so important to keep hidden. but she does do the liberty of handling everything else. Her fingers fly across the keyboard and she opens a command board with all sorts of orders written into it. That's weird. She's more perturbed by that than the riddle. What is it? Midoriya glances between the code and her as he tries to see what she sees. This algorithm looks familiar. It's not the one UA itself used. It's more like a breaker than a secured network, but still belongs to that same one. Her explanation isn't as easy for him to comprehend as his was to hers earlier though. A virus. He takes a guess at what she could mean, but guesses wrong, not exactly. Shield opens a separate window to use her internet browser. This is when the dark web comes in handy. Midoriya raises a brow at that, but refrains from making any sort of comment. Then Shield says something that has him craning to look at the screen again. Oh my, this is the same network that was used to hack into UA long ago, when Gentle Criminal and La Brava interrupted an annual festival. His eyes widen as he reads the results that she's gotten from her deep search. What would somebody want with this? Shield looks back at him in the hopes that he'll have an answer that isn't foreboding. But the least foreboding of reasons Midoriya can muster is, unless it belonged to them originally. And that actually makes sense to him when he considers the possibility. Manami Aba, La Brava, had been the partner of Gentle Criminal. The two were known for their shameless advertisements of the Imperial Tea brand while committing illegal activities on the internet. The teacup he had found at one of the Riddler's hideaways coupled with the Riddler's high-pitched voice leaning towards feminine or younger makes sense with the reuse of her own code. Intelli is no longer his only suspect. Watching Midoriya mutter to himself as he overthinks the need for what's on the USB leaves Shield wondering more than ever. What have you gotten yourself involved in? Her question snaps him out of his musings. Realizing the potential danger she could get into if she learns more, he shuts her down. Nothing you need to be involved in. Midoriya unplugs the flash drive and starts to head for the window that he snuck in through. Sorry that I came here. I didn't know what was on the device. Shield stands up to follow and stop him. No, but pauses when her doorbell rings. She and Midoriya freeze like deer in headlights, turning their attention to the door. Midoriya's posture straightens and Shield realizes just how much he must have slouched for her not to notice his muscles or height until now. Expecting somebody. Even his voice has a much more hardened and focused tone. Nervously, Shield fidgets with her glasses and admits, not this soon. Meaning, Midoriya shoots her a look. I kinda texted Hatsum a little while after you got here. She shrugs and turns away from him to hide her shame. Why? He's too confused to notice her heading for the door until it's too late. Wait. Fortunately, it does happen to just be Hatsum and not some psycho with a gun or Killer Croc having followed Midoriya's scent. Hey, Muscles. The inventor extraordinaire greets her boss while raising up a big metallic briefcase. I brought your new suit. At the mention of a suit, Midoriya blinks questionably. She told me what your secret project was for her. Yeah, I know. Shield avoids eye contact as she tries to explain herself. She does have the courtesy of letting Hatsum in and closing the door so none of her neighbors overhear though. Midoriya brings a hand to his forehead, just short of a facepalm. You both knew. He realizes that his secret is out. You didn't think I knew what all those babies were for. Hatsum's dreadlocks sway when she tilts her head incredulously. Midoriya takes the briefcase from her to open it and see if he's being misled. When he finds a chest plate with a bat printed on the front, he fully accepts that this is actually happening. I didn't think you cared. He sighs heavily now that he has to deal with the two knowing about his alter ego. What kind of irresponsible mother would I be if that were the case? And Hatsum's comments like that aren't helping. Oh god, he really does allow himself to facepalm this time. His hand remains on his face when Shield chimes back in. So, how about telling me that long story now, Batman? The shadow of a bat illuminated in the sky overlooks Japan the same as the rooftop from which the symbol radiates. How one light can shine brighter than an entire cityscape is a riddle more puzzling than the ones that came from an actual Riddler. And yet, it's a question that goes unanswered for the sake of accepting what Batman merely is. A man, a vigilante, a legend, a detective, a hero. Commissioner Tsukachi and Lemillion stand by the modified floodlight they keep stationed on the police precinct, unsuspecting of the arrival of who they intend to contact with it. A living shadow stands behind the commissioner and pro-hero. You can turn it off now. Midoriya emerges from the darkness as Batman only after he's announced his presence. Tsukachi jumps in place. Jesus, nearly gave me a heart attack. Placing a hand over his chest. Not even I can be that stealthy. Lemillion brushes off his initial shock with awe and praise of the vigilante's abilities. He also notices the upgrade in fashion. Whoa, new suit, looking good. Flashing a thumbs up of approval. Batman ignores both of their remarks, getting straight to business by asking, why the signal? Remembering the vigilante isn't one for small talk, Tsukachi is quick with his last comment. Didn't know if you were alive according to Mindjack and your leave of absence. Then provides a rough recap from his end. Quite a lot happened lately. We had a lead on Penguin that we were hoping could finally help us nail him to a cross, but it just so happened to fall flat, unless we arrest Izuku Midoriya too. Batman furrows his brows behind his mask at that. He had thought his alter ego had already been cleared, so he says, Midoriya is innocent. Tsukachi nods along in agreement. I know, I saw to figuring that out for myself. But soon after realizes what the vigilante said and asks, wait a minute, how do you know that? Batman refrains from cursing under his breath. After the whole fiasco with his arrest, the Iceberg Lounge, and his identity being outed to two chaotic women, not mentioning the scandal with Kurogiri and his parents, he's too tired to carry on into the night. It's a struggle to come up with an excuse, his mind too strained. He supplies me, so lands on one that he immediately regrets. Hence the new suit. Lemillion nods as he eyes the upgraded outfit a second time. That explains the gadgets. Tsukachi also nods in understanding as he connects a few dots. It's him who Midoriya worries about the most, considering the commissioner was a detective before his promotion and has the qualified mind to make a deduction of identity. Is he working on Batman Inc. now? Lemillion's quip earns a glare from the already aggravated vigilante. Toga holds up his hands in mock surrender, joking, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead as he tries to apologize. Returning to the task at hand, Batman digs into his utility belt to hand over the thumb drive he had acquired from the Iceberg Lounge. I have new dirt on Penguin that may be able to help you make an arrest. He has no problem forfeiting the intel now that he no longer has any use for it. Does it have to do with our mysterious Riddler? Tsukachi takes the USB from Batman's gloved hand to have a closer look. While the aged law enforcer is inspecting the small plug-in, for better or worse, it does. Batman confirms the commissioner's question. Tsukachi grumbles, figured, while shoving the device into his coat pocket. It'll take time to get a warrant. I suggest also assembling a team of some sort. Penguin has a peculiar bodyguard. Batman recalls his encounter with Killer Croc due to the phantom pains that run throughout his body in that moment. Lemillion laughs like the vigilante just told a joke. I doubt there'll be any match against me. His bicep bulges when he flexes for emphasis. Perhaps, but don't get too arrogant. Batman doesn't doubt All Might's successor's power output but warns him of being too cocky. Being overconfident never ends well. So this is all we have on our enigma, huh? Tsukachi switches the bat signal off as he winds down the conversation. Mindjack's trail went cold too. He wanted me to thank you for saving him, by the way. Recalling the underground hero and the danger he had been in when getting involved, Batman replies, tell him to stop following it then. Then he adds, I've got another potential lead anyways. You do. Tagada's cape whirls the same way Tsukachi's overcoat does when they each pivot to face the vigilante. Potentially. Batman emphasizes his word usage before committing to the so-called lead. I need to ask you for a favor. Missed me? Asks the man behind a clear blast barrier. Midoriya stares at him through the thick glass, staying within the concealment of shadows. The man that he sees is caught between who he was and who he is now. Pointed hair is a faded green, exposing blonde roots now that the dye is diminishing. The lime hue matches the bulb that glows above, illuminating bleached skin. Crimson eyes search for Midoriya's emerald, finding them when the garbed vigilante steps forward. The inmate grins as he looks the caped crusader up and down. Is that a new suit? Don't tell me you've gone and gotten all dressed up for little Almi. He giggles to himself while twisting back and forth to show off his own appearance. They don't really let me wear much else than this straitjacket here. I think the color clashes with my eyes. Wouldn't you agree? Ever since their battle at the hospital, Midoriya had done his best to forget about the tragedy that transpired to create such a malformed version of his former friend. He'd put all of his focus into his nightly endeavors to avoid thinking about it. But now there's no ignoring what's right in front of him. He can't bring himself to look directly into the fallen hero's eyes. Not anymore. Not when there's a bullet hole in between them that destroyed his mind. Why are you staring at me like that? Do I have something on my face? In my teeth? The convalescent cranes forward as he tries to goad a response out of the brooding vigilante. When he doesn't receive anything, he finally snaps and shouts, you came to see me, remember. You have a mouth, so fucking speak. The angry outburst is what manages to get through to Midoriya. The furious expression on his former friend's face is much more recognizable than an eerie smile. Batman swallows down his emotions, reining them in with a hoarse whisper, Kakin. Katsuki Bakugo, or what's left of him, laughs at that, as persistent as ever with that shit nickname. I never could tell if you were playing a joke on me like I was when calling you Deku. He returns to a nonchalant form of manner by leaning back into his chair. Midoriya sits across from him, occupying his own chair. You're sounding more like yourself again. They've been giving you proper treatment. He continues to search for any remains of his friend through the stained glass, but all he gets in return is another shrill laugh. There's no fixing my brain. Do I really need to get the word damage tattooed on my head for you to understand that? Midoriya looks away, staring down at the floor. His gloved hands curl into fists, tightening and trembling at his sides. I don't believe there's no hope. There's always hope. He has a difficult time believing his own words, but his voice stays steady somehow. Though he's pretty sure Kakin sees right through it anyways. Don't tell me you're a Lemillion supporter. Bleh. If I could throw up without being quarantined, I would. The Khan's remark gets the vigilante to look up at him again, an unspoken question of how an inmate would come by any outside information. Heroes or not, has the detained grinning. He shrugs as though it's no big deal. Word gets around. What do you know? Batman asks with a pointed glare. You'll have to be a bit more specific, lamb chop. Bakugo's toothy smile stretches a bit further as he taunts the vigilante some more. Before things can escalate, however, he sighs and slouches back into his chair. This is all nice and well, but why don't you just ask me about what you came here for already? He suddenly shifts to something a little more serious. Grateful for the change in pace, Batman takes the opportunity. Emiko Toga, what do you know about her escape? He goes for a more direct approach. Bakugo raises a brow. Talking gals, are we? I didn't think she was her type. I'm serious. But Batman remains unamused and undeterred. Now fully realizing the reason for the arranged meeting between himself and the vigilante, Bakugo relents. Not without a roll of his eyes first though. She didn't break out by herself if that's what you're asking. He recalls the night of her escape and the conversation in her cell that he had overheard. Looking for a lucky break in his investigation, Batman asks, did you see who aided her? But instead receives a resounding, nope, with Bakugo playfully popping the P at the end. The inmate's red eyes glimmer under the limelight as he asks his own question. Are they giving you trouble? Batman ignores the question, opting for another one of his own. You went to UA. What do you remember about the Culture Festival attack? He just hopes that Bakugo's brain damage hasn't destroyed those memories too much. Boy, does that take me back. Bakugo sighs almost rather fondly as he stares upwards in a feigned flashback state. When he looks dead ahead again, he bursts the imaginary bubble with a harsh tone. I remember not participating. I didn't give two shits. You weren't there when La Brava and Gentle Criminal attacked. Batman frowns since he steered himself into another dead end. He doesn't know whether information is being withheld or if he's simply being led on as some sort of gag. But it's beginning to become evident that it's either of the two. You think those two nobodies are who broke Toga out? Bakugo laughs at the implication like he's just been told a hilarious joke. When he's finished with his giggle fit, Kaken shakes his head in disbelief. I thought you were smarter than that, nerd. Chair legs scrape against the floor when Batman abruptly stands up. He turns, his cape twisting with him, before heading for the exit. This is getting me nowhere. He grumbles more to himself than to the remnant of his friend. Leaving already. It isn't like you to storm off when upset. Kaken calls after the vigilante. They must really be getting under your skin. Giving you a real challenge, are they? Midoriya pauses at the exit, just short of turning the door's handle and leaving. He glances over his shoulder at his former friend. You're the only one getting on my nerves. If you're not going to be the least bit helpful, there's no reason for me to waste my time here anymore. Bakugo's unnerving smile reminds the vigilante of Toga's bloodthirsty grin. I was just making sure. The inmate takes the Caped Crusader's words as some sick form of validation. He rolls his head, cracking his neck. Still, you must have been desperate to come see me. And never once does the smile leave his face. Then again, maybe you were just looking for an excuse all this time. Batman returns his gaze to the exit as he responds, I doubt we'll see each other again if you don't plan on leaving here. And then turns the latch on the door to leave. As he walks out, he says with finality, goodbye, Kaken. But it's only after the door closes behind Midoriya that Bakugo replies back. Oh, I plan on leaving here. Eventually. We'll see each other again real soon, Deku. He eagerly awaits his reunion with his childhood friend and rival. Batman's knees buckle when his feet collide with the next rooftop. He hadn't been keeping count of how many he's leapt onto, but he'd have lost the number by now had he been. All night, the Caped Crusader has been traversing the top of buildings. After the trail went cold on Riddler with his visit to Katsuki Bakugo, he took to patrolling the city. It's been an exhausting output and immense exertion to travel on foot, that he's finally at his limit. His legs give out and he tumbles across the roof he's landed on. His body armor protects him from collecting any more bruises or scrapes. But the rough ride leaves him sprawled out and breathing heavily. The sky has a shade of blue in it as night turns to morning. He stares up at it, allowing himself to bask in the rising sunlight. The way the radiating beams hit the glass windows of the skyscrapers makes for a gorgeous view. He climbs to his feet, stepping up to the ledge of the roof that he's on to overlook the city. Cars are starting to drive their early bird commute to work. Joggers and pet owners are heading out for their morning walks. He recedes from the ledge so that he can't be seen. As much as he hates to admit it, he'll have to head back home now. He can't stay out as Batman anymore. He does suppose he can stay down in the cave, but he has no doubt that Kurogiri will attempt to pay him a visit. The excuse will be to bring him a meal, tea, or coffee. Yet the true meaning of those bothersome visits will be to reconcile. He knows that it's unavoidable. The talk is inevitable, but he's just not ready for it yet. Luckily for him, he has another conversation to get through first. I thought I'd find you brooding somewhere if I looked for you long enough. A feminine voice reaches his ears, but it takes him pivoting to find the source with his eyes. Shirotoko. Batman recognizes the woman immediately despite the goggles covering her face. She's still wearing the same skin-tight leather outfit that she did when they first met. Even so, the vigilante is on guard, not used to being snuck up on. The former pro-heroine turned vigilante raises her goggles up so that they rest on her forehead instead of covering her eyes, allowing the woman a better look at her fellow vigilante. She takes in his appearance, acknowledging the upgraded getup, but noting that the bat insignia hasn't changed in the slightest. You look good. Her voice is a soft purr that eases the earlier tension. So do you. Midoriya unwillingly finds himself relaxing in her presence. He takes in her appearance, one that he hasn't seen in a long time. Her yellow eyes match the hue of the sun behind her. Batman quickly dissipates those thoughts and remembers to ask, "What are you doing here?" "Kirigiri called me." Shirotoko rests a hand on her hip as she relays the reason for her return. And that's all Batman needs to hear in order to walk away. He shakes his head as he goes for the next ledge for a departure from the rooftop they're on. Damn it. Izuku, wait. But Shirotoko grabs him by the crook of an elbow to prevent him from storming off. When Batman looks over his shoulder at her to make her release him, he realizes her expression is as gentle as her grip. She lets go of him anyways. "Don't do this. Don't be you and shut me out," letting him know she means no harm. Batman holds his stare for a while longer, internally wrestling with his options to go or stay. Eventually, Midoriya decides to ask, "What did he tell you?" Shirotoko's look of concern remains as she answers, "Nothing. Just that something's wrong. That you were ready to give up your life for your crusade again." Batman shakes his head in disbelief before fully turning to face her. He has a tough time reining in his frustration as he counters, "There's nothing wrong with that. That never changed. I gave up my life a long time ago so that I could become what I have to be." But Shirotoko shuts him down by reminding him, "That's not what we agreed on when I left." She stares into his eyes while she asks, "What about Eri?" Midoriya is unable to hold the gaze, breaking away and closing his eyes. "She's going to UA. She'll have friends." He excuses himself from that duty and his responsibility to her with as much resolve as he can muster. But Shirotoko can see that the resolve is very little. He can't bear to look her in the eye and he doesn't believe his own words. "Izuku, look at me," she demands. When he doesn't, she says it again more softly, "Take off your mask and look at me." Slowly, Midoriya raises his hands behind his head to undo his cowl. He keeps his eyes closed as he removes the mask. He keeps his head lowered. He doesn't hide the shame. Only when Shirotoko places one of her hands against his cheek does he open his eyes. He leans his face into her tender touch as she says, "You know better than anyone that friends won't be enough. She needs a parent." Because she's right. But he pulls away soon after, remembering the reason he was ready to give up his lifestyle as Izuku Midoriya in the first place. "Kirigiri was that to me. And now, I don't want to do the same to her. What if I let her down?" He worries about the secrets and lies he has to keep sometimes as Batman and how they may affect the people in his life the way his caretaker's lies and secrets did. That's up to you to change. And whatever Kirigiri did wrong, he's clearly trying to make up for it too. But Shirotoko is ready to assure him. Midoriya has to hold himself back from sighing in defeat. All it took was one little talk and he caved so easily. He also has to admit to her though, "You're right." Shirotoko smiles sweetly as she brushes against his chest. Small, she nestles against him. "I always am." Her teasingly flirtatious tone makes smiling contagious, a small smile gracing his lips. He wraps his arms around her and holds her. He realizes in that moment what he allowed to get away when she left. And he has to be grateful to be able to hug her. "I'm glad that you're back. I'm sure Eri will be too." Shirotoko hums in equal elation before looking up at him to ask, "Can I come with you to see her?" "Of course, she'd love that." Midoriya nods and his smile stretches slightly bigger. Suddenly, the dawn of a new day has a much more vibrant meaning to the man. Removing his mask as Batman has allowed Izuku Midoriya to step back into the light. And he isn't alone. Returning to the manor he calls his home, he has a family waiting for him there. He's greeted at the entrance by a cheerful barking. The shepherd and Dane mix bounds into him, asking to be scratched behind the ears by nudging its snout into his hands. "Hello to you too, Ace." Midoriya chuckles as he gives the mutt what it wants. When Ace fixes his sights on Shirotoko, she tries to avoid the incoming slobber attack. "Don't even think about it, dog." But fails miserably when he breaks past her defense and licks her face mercilessly. "Erg. Okay, fine." Eri joins the fray next. Izuku, running into Midoriya for a hug. "Eri, good morning." He returns the hug before crouching down more to her level. "Did you sleep well?" "MMHM." She nods. Then she notices the greenette standing nearby. "Tomoko. Hey there. I missed you too." Shirotoko laughs when Eri barrels into her harder than the dog did. "Are you back for good now?" Eri asks from within Shirotoko's hold. The question catches Shirotoko by surprise. Well, she finds herself looking at Midoriya for help, but he's giving her just as inquisitive an expression as Eri. "Time will tell." She's grateful for Kirigiri when he arrives to come to her rescue. He places a hand on Uri's head to steer her away while reminding her, "Speaking of time, shouldn't you be getting ready for class, young lady?" Uri groans in complaint. "Ugh, fine," but obeys and goes to grab her school supplies anyways. When she turns, Midoriya notices a fresh wound under an elbow. He stops her before she can run off. Whoa, wait. He recalls the bandages she was wrapped in when he found her and immediately worries about the worst-case scenario. How did this happen? Battle training. It's just a scratch. But Uri waves it off as nothing to be concerned with. She even goes as far to proudly show it off and announce, "Now we'll match." I don't know how I feel about that. Midoriya feels his face heat up in embarrassment. On one hand, he doesn't want her to be gaining scars for the sake of looking like him. But on the other hand, he can't help but feel a bit of pride for some reason. He's almost ashamed of himself for being a bad influence. Almost. I think it's kinda cute. Shirotoko leans against his shoulder in order to tease him over it. A sparks as though communicating with her. Midoriya worries that they actually can speak with one another and that she's more than a Catwoman when she says, "See." The dog agrees. Midoriya lets out a breath that he didn't realize he had been holding. So this is what it's like to have a kid. Will I ever stop worrying about her? He stands back up as he watches Uri get ready for school. Kirigiri joins him at his other side, also watching the girl he adopted enthusiastically prepare for the day ahead. Not for a single second. I don't think any parent does. Even I occasionally still poke my head into your room when you're sleeping to check if you're still breathing. He speaks with a fondness that really resonates with Midoriya. Despite his guardian's history and his family's ties to crime, he can't help but be touched at his heart. He realizes that Kirigiri truly does care for him, not just as a butler, but as a parent. For him to have ever doubted Kirigiri, he feels foolish. And now, Kirigiri aids him in his crusade. Whether that be a form of retribution or for his sake, Midoriya accepts the penance. He rests a hand on Kirigiri's shoulder and gives it a firm squeeze as he says, "That does sound like something a father would do." Red and blue lights illuminate the night. Police cruisers parked outside of the Iceberg Lounge. The radiant ice sculpture bounces the colored hues back, the warm and cold spectrum spinning like a giant disco ball. Plenty of heroes, underground and pro, are ready to attend the party. Mindjack and Lemillion join Commissioner Tsukachi on the front lines, backed by a warrant and several other officers. Others are in attendance as well. Batman and feminine vigilante out of view, ready to enter the club through the back entry. Tonight is the night that they bring down a major villain, informant, and mobster, the Penguin. Well aware of the task force prepared to end his whole operation, Penguin's first move is to send out his enforcer in an attempt to stall them. Killer Croc, the Namu blended with Trigger Science Project, comes barreling through the front entry's set of double doors. The reptilian behemoth lets loose a guttural roar, fangs bared. Bullets bounce off the hulkish lizard's scales when the cops fire off rounds, forcing one of the heroes to act. Lemillion darts forwards, a small percentage of power giving him the boost needed to close the distance between himself and Killer Croc in record time. It's that same amount of output that finishes the fight before it can even begin. A single punch all it takes to knock down the quirk-enhanced Shuichi Agachi. The Namu groans as it gets sprawled out. All Might's successor smiles in triumph before rallying the other heroes and law enforcement. Lemillion ushers the group forward, leading the charge into the nightclub. Penguin's establishment is full of low-tier goons who try fighting back. But the weak forces are quickly overpowered, just like their trump card was. Soga Kijisaki ducks under Mindjack's capture scarf, having had combat experience against the weapon during the days of Eraserhead's career. But he too eventually goes down when Mindjack uses his quirk to make Kijisaki stop fighting. However, his employees are a sacrifice that Penguin is willing to make, using them as a distraction. Kajero Okuda tries sneaking out the back exit to escape. The coward makes a break for it through the alley, but he doesn't get very far. A bat-shaped shuriken spins through the air and pierces the place between his thigh and calf. Okuda squawks in pain as he trips and falls, clutching his injured leg. Penguin screams even louder when he sees Batman drop down to retrieve the batarang. "You bloody bastard." Okuda seethes through what teeth still remain in his mouth. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the man who hired assassins to kill you, and nothing is stopping me from doing it again." He tries crawling backwards with his one good leg while threatening the slow-approaching vigilante in hopes that one of the two strategies will save him. But all hope is truly lost for the criminal when Batman unveils a recording device from behind his cape. "Shall I take that as more of a confession to your crimes?" The vigilante can't help but smirk at the gawking expression that his outwitted opponent is making. Okuda hangs his head in solemn defeat. All the fight he had left leaving his system as the last of his spirit is drained. "I want my damn lawyer." His only hope is that he'll be able to still afford a good legal representative once his assets are cut off from him. Batman pockets his recording device before going for a pair of handcuffs. Once he brandishes them from his utility belt, he crouches down to arrest the Penguin. He figures now is as good a time as any to deliver some type of final heroic line. Your reign of power is finished, Okuda. But he either jinxed the arrest or spoke too soon, because he's forced to dodge a knife before he can put the cuffs on Penguin. The blade slices through the air instead of his chest. At the very least, it passes by and stabs the alley wall instead, embedding itself in the brick. Batman spins around to face who threw it. He's expecting a mercenary or another hired help working for Okuda. What he finds instead is Himiko Toga. He had thought the crazed blonde far surpassed the need for a weapon, having evolved, but old habits die hard supposedly. Hiya Batsy, I like the new suit. It makes you look hot. She flirtatiously taunts him from afar by fluttering her eyelashes and flicking up her short skirt. Same as ever, she wears something of a cross between a sailor's uniform and a schoolgirl's outfit. Suddenly, Shirotoko drops down and joins Midoriya at his side. She unties the whip that's wrapped around her waist like a belt and snaps it. Back off, bitch. He's mine. The feminine vigilante gets into a fighting stance in order to defend her partner. Toga feigns a pout. Awa, come on. Her indigent whine loses its facade rather quickly when she begins to melt though. Pretty soon, she's morphed into a flowing liquid with no distinguishable shape or face. The living clay gurgles as it asks, can't you share? Shirotoko scrunches up her face in disgust at the leering slime, winding up her whip to lash out and keep it at bay. The strike causes the clay to splatter as the feline vigilante retorts, not when you look like that, I can't. But Toga quickly recovers, the moving mud rushing head-on like a massive fist. The crazed clay shouts at Shirotoko, rude. But the vigilante performs a backwards flip to avoid the attack before it can manage to connect. So, what's the plan to take her down? Shirotoko lands beside Batman in a low crouch where she takes a brief moment to glance up at him from her poised position. The two vigilantes split up to dodge another attack from Toga before reconjoining on a fire escape. Batman keeps his voice low as he answers Shirotoko, she likes to talk. We'll use that against her. And then what? The heroine shoots another look at her partner, having expected more. Batman ducks under a flying clay axe before responding, improvise, and gliding down from the fire escape. Toga trails behind the caped crusader as he sprints for a dumpster. When Batman leaps over the metal container, he slides across the top to reach the other side, and then attaches two silver circles. The shiny devices activate and launch the dumpster-like ignition to a rocket. Toga's malleable form takes the hit easily, resulting in no lasting damage, but the maneuver does slow her down long enough for Batman to get out of her range, which also gives Shirotoko the time she needs to drop down from her perch and give a distraction of her own. She calls out to gain Toga's attention, hey, ugly. Toga twists her torso around akin to an exorcist, tentacles sprouting to reach out for her opponent. The additional appendages slam into the ground and snake after Shirotoko as she spins and somersaults to strafe the limbs, name-calling. Is that the best you can do, cat lady? Batman throws a few of his batarangs in an attempt to help, but the uniquely shaped shurikens just harmlessly sink into Toga's clay body. He then does the next best thing and tries to verbally draw her focus away from Shirotoko. What are you doing here, Toga? Toga raises a limb, spikes jutting out from the top of its spherical shape. Batman jumps back and dodges the attack as she answers, because you are, Batboy. The vigilante pauses to question her further, you're targeting me. But Toga leaves no time for breathing room, maniacally laughing as her clay form spirals like a liquid tornado and launches pointed fragments from the vortex. Something like that. Both Batman and Shirotoko are forced to take cover to avoid being turned into pin cushions. The spires stab into several sections of the alley, but the dynamic duo manage to get behind objects where they're able to remain unscathed. If you just wanted to get his attention, you should have tried wearing spandex or leather like me. Shirotoko taunts Toga from her corner cover to keep the dialogue-driven diversion going. But all that accomplishes is another heavy-hitting attack directed towards her. Toga forms a long tail that slings around and destroys a brick wall. The debris forces Shirotoko to run from her hiding spot and straight into a secondary strike. I don't need your dating advice, kitty litter. The feline vigilante bounces twice across the alley before spreading like a starfish that's been washed ashore. Kitty litter. I've got to hand it to her. That was a good one. She groans in pain and breathes heavily from exhaustion as she takes a second to recuperate, taking Toga's focus off of his fallen comrade. Batman throws a handful of exploding capsules that detonate on impact. The clay burns at the corners of connectivity while trying to retain its shape. Hey, that coulda hurt me. But Batman is too busy checking on Shirotoko's well-being to notice. Are you okay? Been better. Shirotoko rotates her shoulder to work out the pain but nods nonetheless. Batman reaches into a compartment of his utility belt, take these, and places whatever he pulls out into his fellow vigilante's hand. Shirotoko uncurls her fingers to see what he placed in her palm, surprised to see tiny blue pellets. What are they? Pain pills, vitamins, liquid nitrogen capsules. Batman helps her stand while explaining the plan. The pods may be able to freeze her movements long enough for us to take her down. And she nods in agreement that the strategy can potentially work. Not a bad idea. Okay, let's do it. The two separate to cover opposite sides of Toga, making the femme fatale choose who to target. The crazed Clay goes for Shirotoko first, assuming she's still weakened. But the feline vigilante is quick on her feet, springing from the floor to a ledge and then over Toga, splitting up already. I thought you two were cute together. Toga gurgles from her melted mouth as she tries to keep track of the dynamic duo's separation. They reconvene almost in that same instance, each throwing their freezing pellets at the villainess. Chill out, girl. Nobody said anything about us breaking up. Shirotoko quips as the clay begins to harden from the quick frosting residue. Seriously, a nice pun. Batman looks at Shirotoko slightly disapprovingly. But the feline vigilante isn't too apologetic, shrugging off the criticism. I thought it was funny. She doesn't consider Batman the expert on humor anyways. I did so too, especially when others find the joke funny, such as the symbol of hope himself, Lemillion. The #1 hero arrives in a flourish of his red cape, shattering the ice statue of Toga's clay form. He grins over having arrived in the nick of time, but stops when he notices Shirotoko. Wait, are you Batman's girlfriend? Before he can get an answer, Toga interrupts by reconnecting her separated fragments. What does that make me then? Ha! Is whore. She speaks with a venomous tone that gets everyone's guard back up. Batman steps forward, drawing a batarang. Save your questions for later. Toga is still active. Batman, look, but he gets stopped by Shirotoko grabbing his throwing arm. The vigilante listens, turning his attention upwards to see what it is that she's spotted, watching from a distant rooftop. There's a small silhouette. Batman notices the shadow is around the height and size of Aba as he had suspected. That must be our Riddler. Lemillion comes to the same conclusion of who the spectator may very well be when he notices the distant silhouette too. Go. Shirotoko urges Batman to pursue the other villain while she and Lemillion deal with Toga. We've got this. Take the rest of the nitrogen pods. But Batman takes a moment to spare the remainder of his icing pellet supply first, as well as pauses to fire a taser into Toga, the voltage disrupting the clay's composition. This may also help. He hands off the tool to Shirotoko once he's finished using it. Shirotoko accepts the equipment gratefully before giving him a gentle nudge to leave. Electricity and cold are her weaknesses. Got it. Now go already. The Caped Crusader listens, firing a grapple line and ascending into the night sky without another word. He does hear Lemillion speaking from behind him as he goes though. Boy, is Batman lucky to have a gal like you. Tell me about it. As well as Shirotoko's response. Batman shakes his head, focusing on the task at hand so that he doesn't become distracted. He doesn't take his eyes off the distant silhouette as it hops down from the roof it's on. Not wanting to lose sight of the shadow, he dives with his cape spread out in order to glide in. By the time he reaches the figure, they've made it to the streets. By the time he makes it to the streets, there's an open manhole cover. Not ready to give up the chase just yet, the vigilante follows the elusive enigma into the sewers. His boots slap the slush of the grates below before journeying deeper into the underground tunnels. Green sewage streams in the opposite direction, the current of the unfiltered water flow working against him. Fortunately, he knows he's heading in the right direction when he finds an equally green arrow spray painted on the tunnel wall. The directional cues lead him through the labyrinth until he reaches a boiler room lit by heat lamps. The room temperature is as hot as the steam coming from several vents and pipes. A catwalk leads him down to where a television monitor displays signature question marks in a contrasting green glow. Welcome, Batman. I'm so glad you were able to keep up. The squeaky voice he heard when confronting the riddle writer before echoes through the chamber. Batman spins as he searches for where the voice came from. Turn yourself in, Aba. I've read your file. You're not too far gone. You're not like Toga. A moment of silence passes where the vigilante thinks Aba actually will turn herself in. You think I'm Aba. That's an interesting theory. But he's instead still left with no name or face to the disembodied voice. Sorry to burst your bubble, but you'll have to guess again. Batman's eyes narrow as he searches for the elusive enigma. Then tell me, who are you? First, answer my question. The voice comes from the television's internal speakers this time. What determines the gender of an alligator or a turtle? The TV's screen switches from its question-themed screensaver to a split-screen image of Killer Croc and Melissa Shield. Batman's eyes widen when he realizes Shield is locked in a furnace and Croc's feed is coming from his transport containment unit. Assuming the two are being used as hostages somehow, Batman is left no choice but to answer the riddle he was given. He responds, the heat of the egg. Correct. It's so good to find someone who is also knowledgeable about animal trivia. The Riddler's disembodied voice gleefully giggles. Batman starts deconstructing the situation in his mind of how S.H.I.E.L.D. and Iguchi were utilized. You gained access to Croc through Okuda and knew I would find the thumb drive with him, so you also installed a tracking device into the USB's contents. He figures the whole thing was just a way to trace the signal back to him. Also correct. I had already deduced your identity, Mr. Midoriya, but I wished to know if you had any colleagues that I could use against you. But it turns out the Riddler had intended to use Midoriya's cherished ones against him all along. What's your sick game this time? Midoriya grits his teeth as he tries to keep his composure. Not only is S.H.I.E.L.D.'s life at risk because he had gotten her involved by asking her to decrypt the USB, but the Riddler deduced his identity. The Riddler replies, a simple one, really, then starts to explain the purpose of the hostages. The higher the heat rises in the furnace, the lower the calibration in Mr. Iguchi's bomb transplant. However, the higher the heat in the furnace also means the more likely Miss S.H.I.E.L.D. is to burn to her death. The television screen provides a helpful visual display of a device planted in Iguchi through surgery that connects to the temperature of the furnace S.H.I.E.L.D. is in. If the heat drops in the furnace, Batman looks around the boiler room until he spots what must be the same furnace that S.H.I.E.L.D. is being kept in. I'm afraid Mr. Iguchi will be the one to burst into flames in such a turnout. The Riddler giggles as they share the alternative. Batman racks his brain for a solution to cheat the system. In the meanwhile, he tries to stall for time by stating the obvious, you're making me choose. Yes, I want to push you to your limits and break your mind. What will your code allow you to do and what won't it? Where do you draw the line? The Riddler maintains their same enthused tone as they excitedly elaborate their intentions. Batman reaches for his belt compartment, but remembers that the nitrogen capsules were all used already. Heroes are forced to make sacrifices in the line of duty all the time. He tries to keep his frustration out of his tone as he checks his other belt pouches. But not you, Mr. Midoriya. The Riddler quiets down as though they're getting serious. I've been following your vigilante exploits for a while now. I must say, I'm a fan of your tragic orphan past and motivation. And it's then that Batman realizes how serious they are. How dire this situation truly is. Don't do this. He basically begs his enemy to not take it this far. Without his taser, he can't short-circuit the system either. The boiler room is too far underground for any disrupting device to work. The trap is foolproof. The Riddler has thought of everything. I'm afraid I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to by now. The temperature gauge is automatic and the bomb is disarmable. And the Riddler is merciless. Realizing that he has to choose, Batman begins weighing his options. S.H.I.E.L.D. is an innocent civilian as opposed to Iguchi's criminal record. He also ponders the moral dilemma of whether or not Iguchi is even human anymore after receiving a Namu treatment. The decision seems simple to make, but he hesitates, not wanting to take anyone's life no matter what. Batman places plastique on the furnace and uses his cape to protect himself from the blast that's bound to come. When the metal container is blown open, he fans the flames and steam, rushing forward to pull S.H.I.E.L.D. out of the wreckage. She's drenched in sweat, blonde locks stuck to her face and clothes clinging to her body. Carefully, the vigilante picks her up and places her a distance from the extreme levels of heat. Melissa. He places a gloved hand on her cheek that slides down to her neck so he can check for a pulse. He lets out a breath of relief to learn she's still alive. Though she's in poor shape, that was the choice that I was expecting. The Riddler reminds Batman to check the television screen so he can see the consequences of his decision. Croc's heart monitor triggered the explosive attachment, killing him. Batman's body trembles with rage as he makes the promise, I'll break every bone in your body. The Riddler sounds more amused than concerned by the threat. I wonder if you actually will. Let's find out, shall we? Even going as far to remotely open a door in the lower sector of the boiler room. Batman makes sure to set S.H.I.E.L.D. safely on the catwalk higher out of reach before willingly walking into the next trap. He also leaves behind supplies for her such as a medkit to use when she wakes up. Only after ensuring she'll be alright to be left alone does he journey onward. The caped crusader runs down a long corridor, intent on catching his opponent tonight. The stretch of hallways takes him into an abandoned subway station next. Old train cars are on the tracks and cobwebs litter the place. The tunnels there lead him to another sewer system. The underground maze runs through the entire city, taking him from one end to the other. He eventually climbs out of a sewer grate and realizes he's been led to UA. For a moment, he thinks he's been set up. However, no alarms or security detect his presence. Whoever the Riddler is does indeed have access to the school's facility. For a moment, he reconsiders the plausibility of Intelli as a suspect, but that theory gets disregarded when he comes across hired henchmen. He doubts Intelli would have bothered with getting goons. The thugs go down easy, likely acquired in the slums. They're pawns to a game maker such as the Riddler, or rather, to let the vigilante know he's still on the right path. The trail takes him to the principal's office. It's there and then that he figures out who the culprit is. The connections and ties to UA, the intellect, the insight required to pull all of this off, the means of having the resources to do so, the voice, the size and stature. It all adds up. The former principal of UA, Nezu, sits at the desk with his paws folded. Batman tosses one of the goons he's beaten so that they land at the center of the office. Sorry to get blood on your carpet. The Dark Knight stands in the doorway across from the white animal. I quite like that carpet. Nezu frowns while glancing over his desk at the unconscious thug and the blood that's sure to stain. Batman stomps forward as the animal hybrid carries on. I've always liked this entire office. When the vigilante reaches Nezu, he grabs the rodent by his lime waistcoat and hoists him up face to face. I like it so much that from the moment you entered, this office has been pumped with an odorless nerve gas. Batman pauses, evaluating the creature's words. He hopes to call a bluff. You wouldn't risk it affecting you as well. It's effective, I assure you, but that hope is snuffed out just like his vision. Only to humans though. Batman falls over, joining the goon on the floor, also rendered unconscious.